My name is Ruth, and I am 53 years old. I thought I understood what loss felt like. When my mother died, I grieved. When my father passed, I grieved again. But nothing prepared me for the day I buried my husband Daniel. For 30 years, he had been my anchor, my partner, the man whose laughter filled our home, whose presence steadied me when the world felt too sharp. And yet, as I stood by the graveside, clutching the folds of my black dress like a child holding onto a blanket, I felt something inside me breaking in a way I had never known before. Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The February wind bit at my cheeks. Gray clouds hung low, pressing on us all like heavy hands. I tried to focus on the priest's words, but the sound of dirt hitting the coffin was louder than any prayer. Each thud was a reminder. This is it, Ruth. He's gone. I reached for strength, but my hands found only emptiness. It was Auntie Grace who came to my side first. She was always the gentle one, always knowing when I was about to collapse. Her hand, soft and trembling, found mine and squeezed. "Oh, Ruthie," she whispered, her voice a balm. "Let it out. Don't hold it in." And I did. My tears spilled over, carving hot rivers down my cheeks. I didn't care that people were watching. My husband was in the ground. My future was a hollow shadow of what it used to be. Behind me, I heard Auntie Clara clear her throat, sharp, strong, commanding as ever. Clara was not one for soft words. She believed in truth, even when it cut. "You'll stand tall, Ruth," she murmured, low enough so only I could hear. "Grief can break you, if you let it. Don't let it." I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I could. The mourners drifted away slowly, like autumn leaves scattering. Friends, neighbors, church folk, all giving me sympathetic glances, pats on the arm, murmured condolences. Their words were kind, but they fell like feathers against the storm inside me. That's when I noticed her. She stood a little, apart from the others, near the old oak at the edge of the cemetery. A woman I didn't recognize. Mid-40s, maybe. Dark hair pulled into a neat bun. Her eyes sharp, unyielding, fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. At first, I thought she was just another mourner, perhaps someone from Daniel's work I had never met. But when our gazes met, she didn't smile politely or lower her eyes. She held my stare. There was something unsettling in her expression, not grief, not sympathy. Something else. And she wasn't alone. 2 young adults stood with her, a boy and a girl, well, not children, but young enough to still carry that rawness of youth. The boy was tall, with Daniel's broad shoulders. The girl had eyes that seemed too familiar, though I couldn't place why. I looked away quickly, telling myself not to read too much into it. Funerals draw all kinds of people. Maybe they were distant cousins or friends of the family. Still, a knot formed in my stomach. Grace followed my gaze. "Do you know them?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "No, I've never seen them before." Clara leaned in, her sharp eyes narrowing. "Then why are they staring like hawks?" I didn't answer. I didn't want to answer. When the last of the mourners had gone, I lingered at the grave, whispering a final goodbye. The wind caught my words and carried them away. When I turned back, the strange woman and her companions were gone. But the knot in my stomach remained. The days after the funeral were a blur. Grief has a way of distorting time. Hours felt like minutes, and minutes felt like hours. I moved through the house like a ghost, touching Daniel's things, inhaling his scent from the shirt still folded in his drawer, listening for footsteps that would never come again. Grace came by every day with casseroles I barely touched. She would sit with me at the kitchen table, knitting while I stared into my tea. "You have to eat, Ruthie," she would say. her eyes soft with worry. He wouldn't want you to waste away. But food tasted like ash. Clara was different. She would burst into the house like a storm, slamming doors, clattering pots, scolding me for letting dishes pile up. "You can't fall apart," she snapped one morning, yanking open the curtains to let in light. "You're still alive, Ruth. You hear me? Alive. He may be gone, but you're not." I wanted to argue, but the truth was I felt half dead. And then, 3 days after the funeral, I found the letter. I was sorting through Daniel's desk, trying to gather paperwork for the lawyer. Bills, insurance forms, tax documents, all the dull necessities of death. My hands shook as I opened drawers, the smell of old wood and ink filling my nose. That's when I saw it. An envelope tucked beneath a stack of files, yellowed at the edges, as if it had been hidden for years. My name wasn't on it. Instead, it was addressed in Daniel's handwriting to someone named Marisol. I froze. My heart pounded in my ears as I unfolded the paper. The words blurred at first through my tears, but slowly they came into focus. "My dearest Marisol, not a day goes by that I don't think of you. You are my light, my joy, my reason. I wish I could give you more, but for now, this will have to be enough. Forever yours, D." I dropped the letter as if it had burned me. My hands trembled, my breath caught in my throat. Marisol. The name rattled in my head like a curse. "Grace," I shouted, my voice breaking. She came running from the kitchen, her knitting needles still in hand. "What is it, Ruthie? What's wrong?" I pointed at the letter, unable to speak. She picked it up carefully, her lips moving silently as she read. When she finished, her face paled. "Oh, Ruthie!" Clara appeared in the doorway, her eyes sharp. "What is it?" Grace tried to hide the letter, but Clara snatched it from her hand. She read quickly, her jaw tightening, with every word. When she looked up, her eyes burned with fury. "That bastard!" she hissed. "Clara!" Grace scolded, but her voice was weak. "No, Grace, don't you dare soften this. Ruth's husband had another woman, another life." I shook my head violently. No, it can't be. He loved me. Clara cut me off, her voice like steel. "Open your eyes, Ruth. You saw that woman at the funeral. You saw those children. This isn't some fling. This is something bigger." Grace reached for my hand. "We don't know the whole story yet. Maybe it's just an old mistake. Maybe it meant nothing." But deep inside, I knew. The knot in my stomach tightened until it hurt. The strange woman. The children. The letter. It wasn't a mistake. It was a life I knew nothing about, and it was about to collide with mine in ways I couldn't yet imagine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The letter burned into my memory. Every word felt like a betrayal carved into my heart. "My dearest Marisol, forever yours." I wanted to tear it to shreds, to burn it, to pretend it never existed, but I couldn't, because some part of me knew it was just the beginning. I thought grief would be the hardest part of losing Daniel. I thought learning to live without his laughter, his touch, his presence would break me. But I was wrong. The hardest part wasn't losing him. The hardest part was discovering I never truly had him in the first place, and deep down, beneath the grief and shock, a new feeling began to stir. Anger. Because betrayal has a way of igniting something inside you. Something you didn't know was there. Something that would carry me through the storm I was about to face. The storm of Marisol. The storm of Daniel's secret life. The storm that would shatter everything I thought I knew about love, family, and inheritance. And though I didn't know it then, that storm was only just beginning. The morning after I found Daniel's letter, I sat at the kitchen table with a cold cup of tea in my hands. The steam had long since faded, but I hadn't taken a single sip. My fingers trembled as I traced the rim of the cup, my thoughts caught between grief and fury. Marisol, that name haunted me. It rolled around my mind like a stone, heavy and sharp, scraping at every tender part of me. I thought of the woman at the funeral, the one standing at the back, her eyes fixed on me with something more than sympathy. Was that her? Was that Marisol? And those two young adults beside her? No. I couldn't let myself think it. Not yet. Grace arrived first that morning. She never knocked, just walked in like she always had, carrying a basket of muffins she had baked at dawn. She took one look at me and set the basket down with a sigh. "Oh, Ruthie," she murmured, pulling out the chair beside me. "You didn't sleep, did you?" I shook my head. She reached for my hand, her warmth steady against my cold skin. "You can't torment yourself over that letter. It was years old, wasn't it? Maybe it was nothing." "Nothing?" My voice cracked. He called her his joy, Grace, his reason. "Forever yours, do you call that nothing?" Grace's eyes filled with tears. "No, but maybe it was before you. Maybe it was during a rough patch. We don't know." Before I could respond, the door burst open and in stormed Clara. She was like a gale wind, slamming her purse onto the counter, her heels clacking against the floor. "Have you eaten?" she barked. "No," I admitted softly. "Figures." She yanked open the fridge, rummaging like a general preparing for war. "You can't fight battles on an empty stomach, Ruth. And make no mistake, this is a battle." Grace frowned at her sister. "Clara, don't start." But Clara ignored her, pulling out eggs and bacon. "That woman at the funeral, did you see her eyes? Sharp as knives? And those kids? Don't tell me you didn't. Notice the resemblance." I swallowed hard. I noticed. Clara slammed the skillet onto the stove. "Then stop pretending this is just some fling. He had another family, Ruth. Another family. And they're circling now, like vultures," Grace gasped. "Clara, don't. We don't know that." Clara turned, spatula in hand, her eyes blazing. "Don't be naive, Grace. Funerals bring out the truth. And if you think they were there just to pay respects, you're a fool. They want something. You mark my words." I buried my face in my hands. God help me. Later that day, I couldn't shake the urge to drive past the cemetery again. I told myself it was to bring fresh flowers, but the truth was I wanted answers. The cemetery was quiet, the wind rustling through bare branches. I laid a bouquet of lilies on Daniel's grave, my tears splattering the petals. "Why, Daniel?" I whispered. "Why would you do this to me?" As I turned to leave, I froze. She was there again, the same woman from the funeral, Marisol. She stood a few rows away, her hands clasped in front of her, her dark eyes fixed on me. For a moment, neither of us moved. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, I forced myself to speak. "Do I know you?" Her lips curved into a small smile. Not warm, almost smug. "Not yet, but you will." My breath caught. "Who are you?" Before she could answer, the young man and woman appeared beside her. The boy had Daniel's broad shoulders, his jawline. The girl, she looked so much like him it made my chest ache. Marisol placed a hand on each of their shoulders. "These are my children, Daniel's children." The world tilted, my knees threatened to give way. "What did you say?" "You heard me." Her smile widened. "We were his family, too." "No," I whispered, shaking my head violently. "No, that's not possible. He was my husband." Your husband," she cut in sharply, "was also my partner. For over 20 years. The ground beneath me seemed to vanish. 20 years? That was almost the length of my marriage." "You're lying," I gasped. The young woman stepped forward, her eyes flashing. "We're not lying. He was our father, whether you like it or not." The young man stayed quiet, his jaw tight, his gaze a storm I couldn't read. I staggered back, clutching my chest. "No, no, he loved me." Marisol tilted her head. "He loved us too." Her words cut deeper than any knife. When I got home, I collapsed onto the couch, sobbing until my throat ached. Grace sat beside me, rubbing my back, her tears falling onto my shoulder. "Oh, Ruthie," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. I can't imagine the pain you're feeling." Clara paced the room like a caged lion, her fury vibrating in the air. "That witch, she dares to stand at his grave and claim him. She dares to flaunt those children like trophies." "They're his children, Clara," I choked out. "They looked just like him. I can't deny it." Clara spun on her heel, her eyes blazing. "Then you fight, Ruth. You fight with every ounce of strength you have. Because if they think they can waltz in here and take what's yours, they have another thing coming." Grace shook her head, her voice gentle. "Clara, please, this isn't the time for war. Ruth is grieving. She needs compassion, not battle plans." Clara's jaw tightened. "Compassion won't protect her from wolves." I sat in silence, my tears soaking the cushion. Compassion or war, I didn't know which I needed. All I knew was that my life had shattered, and I didn't know how to pick up the pieces. That night, I dreamed of Daniel. He was standing in our garden, the sun warm on his face, smiling at me the way he used to. For a moment, everything felt whole again. But then, from behind him, Marisol appeared. Her hands slid around his waist, her eyes locking onto mine with triumph. And the two young adults stood beside her, their hands clasped with his. I woke with a scream, my heart pounding, my pillow soaked with tears. The betrayal was no longer just a wound. It was a fire, burning through every memory, every moment I thought I understood. And deep down, I knew Clara was right. This wasn't just about grief anymore. This was about survival. The next day, a letter arrived in the mail. A thick envelope, the kind that carried weight even before you opened it. My hand shook as I tore it open. Inside was a notice from a law firm. Marisol and her children were challenging Daniel's will. I dropped the papers, my vision blurring. Grace gasped. Clara cursed. The storm had arrived, and I wasn't ready, but I would have to be. Because this was only the beginning. I used to think the cruelest part of widowhood was silence, the silence of an empty bed, of footsteps that never came down the hall, of laughter that would never again fill the living room. But silence was easier than lies. Silence I could live with. What I couldn't live with was betrayal. The letter from Daniel to Marisol still sat on my kitchen table, a blade I couldn't stop touching even though it kept cutting me. Grace begged me to throw it away. Clara wanted me to march it straight to a lawyer. But I couldn't do either. I needed it near me, as though staring at it long enough might make the words change. They never did. My dearest Marisol, forever yours. Every time I read it, I felt as though I were watching my life unravel thread by thread. The day after the law firm's notice arrived, I forced myself into Daniel's study again. I told Grace and Clara I was just gathering bank statements for the lawyer, but the truth was darker. I was hunting. Hunting for evidence. Hunting for the pieces of my life that no longer fit. The desk smelled like him cedar and ink, the faint trace of his aftershave. I wanted to collapse into that scent, to believe in the man I thought he was. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I opened drawer after drawer, my hands shaking. Bills, tax forms, insurance policies, all the things of ordinary life. I almost gave up when I noticed the small lockbox shoved against the back of the lowest drawer. The key was still in his top drawer. Typical Daniel, always careless with secrets. The lock clicked open, and inside were envelopes. Dozens of them. I pulled one out, then another, my breath catching. Letters, all addressed to Marisol. I sank onto the floor, the envelopes spilling into my lap like ashes. My hands trembled as I tore one open. My love, I can't make it tonight. Ruth is suspicious, but soon, always soon. My stomach lurched. Another. The children are growing so fast. I wish I could be there more. You know I love them. One day they'll understand why I can't. Another. Don't lose faith in me. This arrangement won't last forever. You'll have what you deserve. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. By the 5th letter, my tears blurred the ink. By the 10th, I couldn't breathe. He hadn't just strayed. He hadn't just faltered. He had built another life, another family, brick by brick, lie by lie, while I scrubbed floors, worked double shifts, cooked dinners, and believed in him. Grace found me there an hour later, curled on the floor, clutching the letters to my chest. She dropped her knitting bag and knelt beside me. "Oh, Ruthie," she whispered, her tears falling onto my hands. "You weren't supposed to find these." I let out a ragged laugh. "Not supposed to? Grace, I was never supposed to know any of it. He wanted me to die thinking I was his only love." Grace pressed her forehead against mine. "That doesn't erase what you had, Ruth. The years, the memories, the love he gave you. The love he gave me." My voice broke, rising into a sob. Was it love, Grace? Or was it convenience? Was I his wife, or just his cover? She didn't answer. She couldn't. When Clara came the next morning and saw the letters spread across the kitchen table, her face hardened into stone. She didn't cry. She didn't comfort. She simply nodded, as though the evidence confirmed what she had known all along. "I told you," she said flatly. "I told you, Ruth. Men like Daniel don't get to have it both ways without leaving scars." I slammed my fist against the table. "Then, why didn't I see it? Why didn't I notice? 20 years, Clara. 20 years he lied to me. Am I blind? Am I stupid?" Clara leaned down, gripping my chin in her hand. Her eyes bored into mine, fierce and unflinching. "You are not stupid. You loved him. That's not a crime. The crime is his. Don't carry his shame on your shoulders." I wanted to believe her, but shame clung to me like tar. That week blurred into endless hours of sifting through Daniel's papers. Every drawer I opened, every file I touched, I braced myself for another betrayal. And I found plenty. Bank transfers I never knew about, checks written to cash, receipts for apartments I'd never seen. Grace begged me to stop, to rest. Clara urged me to dig deeper, to uncover every secret. I felt trapped between their voices, one offering balm, the other fire, while I bled from wounds I hadn't even known I carried. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table with both of them. The letters lay between us like a corpse. Grace reached out, her voice soft. "Maybe he loved you both. Maybe it wasn't about choosing, but about splitting himself." I stared at her, my heart cracking. "How can you say that? How can you defend him after this?" "I'm not defending him," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "I'm trying to defend you, because if you let this destroy every memory, you'll have nothing left but anger." Clara snorted. "Good. Anger is what she needs, not lullabies." "Clara! No, Grace, stop wrapping this in kindness. Ruth needs to face the truth. That man betrayed her. He robbed her of years, of dignity. And now his little mistress and her spawn are circling like vultures. If Ruth doesn't fight, she'll lose everything. Their voices clashed, soft and sharp, compassion and fury. I sat between them, torn in two. Finally I whispered, "Maybe I've already lost everything." The room fell silent. The following morning, I received a call from the lawyer. My stomach clenched as I answered. "Mrs. Thompson," the voice said crisply. "We need to discuss Daniel's estate. The other party is making claims." The other party? They couldn't even bring themselves to say her name. "What kind of claims?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Claims of inheritance. They're asserting Daniel provided for them as dependents. They believe they're entitled to a share of the estate." I sank into a chair. "But his will, it leaves everything to me." "That is correct. But they're arguing intent. That Daniel intended for them to benefit, regardless of what the document says. We'll need to prepare." Prepare. The word echoed in my head. Prepare for battle. Prepare for humiliation. Prepare for the world to see me not as a widow, but as a fool. When I hung up, Grace tried to comfort me. Clara muttered curses under her breath, but I couldn't hear them. All I could hear was Marisol's voice at the cemetery. We were his family too. And for the first time, I wondered if she was right. That night, I sat in Daniel's chair, clutching one of his old sweaters to my chest. The scent of him lingered, cruel in its comfort. I pressed my face into the fabric and sobbed. "Why, Daniel?" I whispered into the wool. "Why wasn't I enough?" The house gave no answer, only silence. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the grief and the shame, something stirred again. Not just anger. Resolve. Because Clara was right about one thing. If I didn't fight, I would lose everything. And I wasn't ready to let Marisol steal what was left of my life. Not without a war. The hardest part of betrayal isn't the moment you discover it. It's the days that follow, when the truth seeps into everything you thought you knew. It poisons your memories. You look back on anniversaries, vacations, Sunday dinners, and you start to wonder, was he with her the night before? Did he come home from their bed to mine? That was the fog I lived in after finding Daniel's letters. And then came the knock. It was a Thursday afternoon, gray skies pressing against the windows. I was sitting at the kitchen table, bills spread out in front of me, though I couldn't make sense of the numbers. My tea had gone cold again. Grace was knitting in the living room. Clara was pacing as always, muttering about lawyers and wolves. The knock was sharp, 3 raps, confident, not the polite tap of a neighbor or the heavy thud of a delivery man. I froze. Clara looked up. "You expecting someone?" I shook my head. The knock came again. Grace set her knitting aside and touched my arm. "Do you want me to get it?" Before I could answer, Clara stormed toward the door. "I'll handle it." I heard the creak of hinges, the intake of breath. Then Clara's voice, low and edged like a blade. "Well, well, look who finally decided to crawl out of the shadows." My stomach dropped. I knew before I even saw her. Marisol. I rose on shaking legs, my breath shallow. When I reached the doorway, there she stood. The woman from the funeral, Daniel's Marisol. Her dark hair was pinned neatly, her blouse pressed, her eyes steady as they locked on mine. And behind her, the 2 young adults. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. The boy had Daniel's stance, broad shoulders, a proud tilt of the head. The girl's eyes. God, those eyes. They were Daniel's eyes, staring at me from another face. I nearly crumpled. Marisol's lips curved into a polite smile. "Mrs. Thompson." The sound of her voice was like oil poured over fire. Smooth, deliberate, suffocating. Clara stepped forward, her arms crossed. "You've got a lot of nerve showing up here." But Marisol ignored her. Her eyes stayed on me. "Ruth," she said softly, as if we were old friends. "I thought it was time we spoke." I swallowed, my throat raw. You have no right to be here. Her smile didn't falter. On the contrary, I have every right. For 20 years, Daniel promised me and our children that we were part of his world, that he would never abandon us. I only want what's fair. My knees shook. Fair? The young woman stepped forward. She was maybe 22, her dark hair falling in waves, her voice sharp with anger. Fair would be my father acknowledging me while he was alive. Fair would be not hiding us like we were some dirty secret. The young man stayed back, silent, his jaw tight. But his eyes never left mine. Grace slipped beside me, her hand clutching mine. Please, she said gently, this isn't the time. Ruth is grieving. Grieving? Marisol cut in. So are we. We lost him too. Do you think your grief is the only grief that matters? Her words struck like slaps. Clara snarled, Don't you dare compare your position to Ruth's. She was his wife. You were his love, Marisol said firmly, her chin lifting. Don't reduce me to a word meant to shame. I was part of his life as much as you were. And my children. She gestured to them. They are his blood, his legacy. You can't erase them. I staggered back, clutching Grace's hand. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. Why are you here? I whispered. Marisol's smile returned, colder now. Because Daniel made promises, and I intend to see them honored. Clara's voice was sharp as glass. Promises don't mean a damn thing if they're not in writing. And in writing, everything belongs to Ruth. End of story. Marisol's eyes flickered. We'll see about that. She turned, ushering her children away. The girl threw one last glare at me before following. The boy hesitated, his eyes softening just slightly, as though he wanted to speak. But then he turned, silent, and they left. The door closed with a click that echoed like a gunshot. I sank into a chair, shaking so badly I could barely breathe. Grace knelt beside me, whispering comfort. Clara paced like a storm about to break. She's coming for you, Clara said. Make no mistake. That woman won't stop until she has what she wants. Grace shook her head, tears in her eyes. She's hurting too, Clara. Can't you see? This is a tragedy for all of them. Clara spun on her. Don't be a fool. This isn't about hurt. This is about money. About property. About tearing Ruth's life apart. Their voices blurred as I stared at the door. The ghost of Marisol's smile lingered in my mind, along with her words. Daniel made promises, and I intend to see them honored. I knew then that Clara was right. This wasn't grief, this was war. That night, I lay awake, the house too quiet, my body too restless. I could still hear Marisol's voice. I could still see her children's faces. And for the first time, I began to wonder, what did Daniel tell them about me? Did he paint me as the villain? Did he call me cold, unloving, an obstacle to the life he wanted with them? Or worse, did he tell them nothing at all? Did he pretend I didn't exist? The thought twisted my stomach until I could barely breathe. I rose and went back to Daniel's study. The letters were still on the desk, scattered like fallen leaves. My fingers hovered over them, but I couldn't bear to read again. Instead, I opened the lowest drawer, searching for more. That's when I found the folder. It was thin, tucked behind tax files. Inside were bank records, large sums, transferred monthly to an account I didn't recognize. The name on the account, Marisol Vega. Tears burned in my eyes. He hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He had drained our finances, funneled money to them, for years. I staggered back, clutching the folder to my chest. Clara's words echoed in my head. They want to take everything from you. And maybe they already had. The next morning, I sat with Grace and Clara at the table, the folder between us. Grace pressed her lips together, shaking her head. Oh, Ruthie, this is worse than I feared. Clara slammed her fist onto the table. I knew it. I knew he was bleeding you dry for that woman. God, if he were alive, I'd kill him myself. Clara, Grace cried. What? Don't pretend you're not furious too. Look at this, Grace. He betrayed her not just in heart but in pocket, for years. And now this woman has the gall to stand on Ruth's porch and demand more. Grace wiped her tears. I don't know how Ruth will survive this. I looked up, my voice low but steady. I'll survive. I don't know how yet, but I will. Because if I don't, she wins. Clara nodded, fierce pride flashing in her eyes. That's the Ruth I know. We'll fight her. We'll fight them all. Grace's hand trembled as she reached for mine. But, Ruthie, what if they're telling the truth? What if Daniel did make promises? What if he meant for them to have something? I closed my eyes. Then he should have put it in the will. He didn't. That was his choice. The words tasted like iron in my mouth. That evening, the phone rang. My heart lurched when I saw the caller ID, the lawyer. Mrs. Thompson, his voice said briskly. I thought you should know. The other party has filed a petition to contest the will. We'll need to prepare for a court hearing. The room spun. Court. Public humiliation. My private pain dragged into the light for all to see. When I hung up, Grace looked stricken. Clara looked ready to burn the world down. And me? I looked at the door, where Marisol had stood, smiling with her quiet triumph. And I swore to myself, trembling but resolute, she will not take my life, not my home, not my dignity. If this was war, then so be it. I was ready. There's a particular kind of silence that follows the discovery of a life built on lies, the quiet that settles after the rooms have been emptied and the echoes have nowhere to bounce. It's not peaceful. It's an empty, hungry silence that waits like a patient animal for you to step into it so it can pounce with questions. For days after Marisol stood on my porch, after the bank statements and letters fell across my kitchen table like proof of betrayal, that silence lived in my house. I could feel it in the way the kettle didn't seem to sing the same, in the way the morning light no longer warmed the bed the way it used to. Even Daniel's picture on the mantel looked alien, as if some stranger had been posed there in my life. Then the letter from the law firm landed the way finality. The court date was set, they said, and we would need documentation. The words were sterile in print, but in the way the lawyer said them over the phone, they hung like a guillotine. Evidence, he told me. Documents proving intent, supporting claims. DNA, he didn't say, but the thought surfaced like bile. I was not a naive woman. I had watched enough television. I had sat in enough church meetings where inheritances became battlegrounds. But nothing in the textbooks had prepared me for the personal heave of humiliation that came when the possibility of a genetic truth was mentioned. The idea that my husband's blood might be being tested, compared, quantified as if love could be measured in chromosomes made something in me clench. Clara, of course, was practical to the point of cruelty. If it comes to DNA, let it come, she said the night she returned from a meeting with our lawyer. She slid a cup of tea toward me with one hard hand and folded the other across her chest, like armor. We have nothing to hide. The truth is messy, and usually messy favors the truthful. Grace, in her usual way, squeezed my hand under the table. It feels invasive, Ruthie. But if that's what it takes to prove this isn't your fault, I'll sit in a million waiting rooms. There was a pause, not of comfort, but of calculation. I felt like an actor stepping onto a stage where the script had been stolen. The words I had to say were being written as I spoke them. But I also felt a different, fiercer thing, a desire not to be erased. If DNA could show that Daniel's blood ran through others, it could not erase the years he'd given me. But if the other family used that blood to claim my home, then the chemistry of his deceit would be the tool they wielded. I wanted to make sure no one could weaponize my grief against me. The first time I heard that phrase, "blood doesn't lie," it was Clara, tossing the words like a gauntlet onto the table. She loved blunt truths, they suited her. For her, there was probably comfort in absolutes. For me, they were brittle and cold. A week later, Marisol's lawyer filed a motion for genetic testing. They argued it would resolve paternity and dependent status and streamline the estate process. The judge considered it and, as if reading from a playbook none of us had been given ahead of the curtain rising, ordered tests. Within days, a clinic called, asking me to come in. I refused at first. Who would want to walk into a room for a test that felt like being asked to account for your life? But the lawyer insisted. The court ordered it, he said. Non-compliance looks suspicious. So I went. They called me into a sterile room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and lemon. A nurse was gentle, professional. She handed me the little plastic swab like some token from a ritual I didn't want to attend. "We'll swab the inside of your cheek," she said with a practiced smile. "It's quick and painless. It's routine." Routine. The word stuck in my throat. They swabbed, then told me the sample would be sealed and processed. I sat there, hands folded, and felt the slow, steady burn of tears come again, not because the test hurt, but because I had to submit to a procedure that reduced a lifetime of vows to a vial. Later, I watched as samples were taken from the two young adults. Quick glances from them that said defiance and weariness all at once, and from Marisol, who stood near the doorway, with her chin lifted, tired, firmness shaping her posture. Not once did she reach for me. Her resolve was a shield, or a weapon. I couldn't decide which yet. Back at home, Clara paced like a caged wolf. "You did the right thing," she said. "Truth isn't afraid of sunlight." "Is it truth?" I asked quietly. "Or is it proof that binds us in courtrooms and cold rooms?" "I don't know that my heart wants to be tested like evidence." Grace, knitting beside the window, looked up and her eyes were soft. "Sometimes proving what's real helps you mourn properly. It lets you ask the right questions. But asking the right questions doesn't soften the wrong ones." The waiting was the worst. It stretched into days that felt like marathons with no finish. Every time the phone rang, my heart jumped as if it might leap entirely from my chest. When the call finally came from the clinic, I spent a moment simply holding the receiver as if the ordinary weight of it could steady me. The nurse on the line was efficient, measured. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, "the samples have been processed. I'm afraid I can only release results to counsel. Your attorney will contact you with the findings." My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles hurt. I waited for the lawyer's call like a condemned person waits for the final sentence. When he called, he was all business, so much so that his lack of warmth felt like another bite. "Ruth," he said, "the results confirm paternity. The court will consider this when reviewing claims. I recommend you prepare for the next steps." The words "confirm paternity" landed like a punch that knocked the air out of me. It felt as if someone had opened the doors of my life and let the wind sweep through everything secure. The boy and the girl were Daniel's. The blood matched. The science said so, neat and incontestable. When I told Grace, she sat very still, then wrapped both arms around me and let the tears come. "Oh, Ruthie," she said, her voice breaking. "My poor girl." Clara slammed a fist into her palm. "So that's that. They'll try for the estate now, but we have the will. We have Daniel's final wishes." Her voice was fierce, but somewhere under the bravado I could hear the tension, the knowledge that DNA changed the battlefield even when it didn't change the law. What I had not anticipated was the way the town responded. Word, like it always does, spread. People murmured in markets, crossing the street, saying pity-laced hellos. Friends I expected to stand steady faltered. Some offered their support. Others offered condolences that felt like they were being measured on a ledger of who was useful to carry what outrage. Rumors blossomed into versions of the story that finally suited whoever was listening. Marisol trotted each version out like armor. They're his children, they deserve what's right. While I felt progressively more diminished, my grief threaded with humiliation. The court sessions that followed were not like anything I had imagined. They were not dramatic scenes from novels. They were procedural, meticulous, and more humiliating than I expected. My lawyer cross-checked deposit records, argued over the definition of dependent, discussed whether a verbal promise carried weight against a written testament. The other side brought forth photographs of Daniel with the two young adults on holidays, smiling, holding hands, a collage of snapshots that were meant to put a face to their claims. DNA, they argued, proved a relationship. A relationship implied duty. Duty implied entitlement. Clara watched the proceedings like a hawk. She filled me with lists, dates, bank transfers, witnesses who could corroborate where Daniel spent time, co-workers who remembered him speaking of travel, receipts from motels that were troubling but incomplete in their story. She urged me not to conflate feelings with facts. "We are fighting the facts," she would say. "The sympathy is useless in a courtroom." Grace, bless her, tried another tack. She sat in the same pew as I did at each hearing, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. Between sessions, she would whisper, "You must not hate the children, Ruth. They did not write those letters. They are flesh of your husband. Remember your own compassion." How does one balance compassion with the visceral need to protect the small remaining sanctuaries of one's life? For a while, the question haunted every night. Would I look at those children and see my husband's blood or his betrayal? Could I tell myself the two were not mutually exclusive? I learned, in the crucible of the courtroom, that human beings are specialists at living in paradox. You can be the core of someone's joy and the instrument of their pain. You can be loved and be used. You can be betrayed and be beloved in different rooms of a man's life. The law tried to render such contradictions tidy. Life refused to be neat. There was a day, weeks into the hearings, when the younger of the two Daniel's daughter sat across from me and suddenly looked less like an adversary and more like someone I might have known if life had been different. She had kept her hair loose that day, and when she spoke she did not do so with the pomp of entitlement. She looked as if she had been carved by need. "You knew," she said, voice small and fierce at once. "You had to have known at some point. How did you sleep with that?" Her words were more of a question than an accusation. They hung between us. "I didn't know," I said. The words were heavy, laden with the truth I had found in paper and ink. If I had known, I would have walked away, or I would have spoken sooner. I don't know how to answer guilt I never earned. She studied me, searching for cracks. "But he must have loved you." "He did. But love is not always honest." The admission tasted like tincture. Bitter, medicinal, necessary. "You miss him?" she asked then, with that awful, simple tenderness that made me want to fold into her and want to protect her and to throw my fists at the sky all at once. "Yes," I said. "I miss the man I thought I had. I miss the constancy. But I don't miss being a pawn in a lie." She nodded, as though that settled something between us. And for a fleeting moment, perhaps a blink in the long arc of this storm, I saw her not as my rival but as another casualty of Daniel's duplicity. The DNA had given her claim legitimacy in the language of the court, but it had also made visible the frailty of human hearts. It painted a ledger of obligations that made sense to lawyers but didn't always translate into moral certainties. Blood did not lie, but it also did not tell the whole story. It did not tell us whether a man was present, absent, generous, cruel, present for birthdays or absent for ages. It only said what it said, that these two young people were his offspring. When the judge looked at the pile of evidence, the will, the letters, the bank transfers, the testimony, he sighed in that way judges do, the kind of sound that means there will be more hearings, more words, more waiting. He ordered a thorough review of Daniel's finances and left the question of distribution to be argued further. The case was not decided. It was protracted, a slow, surgical gnaw at what remained of the life I had thought secure. On the day we left the courtroom, Clara put her hand on my shoulder and squeezed until I thought my bones might spasm. "We'll not let them take what is ours," she said, the promise of battle resonating in her voice. "We'll meet them with every shred of truth." Grace reached over and kissed my forehead, murmuring, "Just remember, Ruthie, blood won't tell you who deserves your love. You decide that." That night I lay awake and thought about her words. They weren't a release, they weren't a solution, but they were a map, a choice. I could let the bloodline dictate the terms of my grief and my life, or I could choose, every day, what pieces I would keep and what pieces I would hand back to the world in the shape of anger or mercy. The DNA had said he had fathered children. The law would ask whether that fatherhood created a legal obligation, but the heart had its own questions. Did fatherhood absolve deceit? Did blood require forgiveness? There are no tidy answers to such things. There are only nights when you lie awake and listen to the house breathe, and mornings when you sit at the kitchen table and fold letters into piles and try to figure out whether the brittle edges of a check should be measured against the softness of a memory. In the weeks that followed, as hearings ebbed and flowed, my life became a ledger of appointments, meetings with lawyers who had their own coffee rings on legal pads, a forensic accountant who explained transfers like a man describing weather patterns, visits to the bank where tellers smiled too brightly because they had learned to practice empathy by rote. At home, Clara's anger grew into movement. She started keeping lists of witnesses to call, neighbors who had seen Daniel at odd hours, men who had done work at the properties he allegedly kept for Marisol. She made phone calls with a ferocity that had me both horrified and secretly relieved. The outside world became manageable when channeled into action. Grace cultivated our garden like a prayer. She planted herbs and tended them with prayers between snips. "The soil remembers," she said, as if tending lavender could fix the brokenness of a human being. "Roots go deep. You will root again." So I did what the two of them asked in their own ways. I fought and I tended. I met DNA with counsel and counsel with cross-examination. I planted seeds in a back patch of dirt and watched for something green. I let my heart ache and also file papers. I tried to be merciful sometimes and strategic other times. The contradiction became my routine. Blood doesn't lie. That is true. But blood also doesn't decide how a life is lived. People do. And I was not ready to let a laboratory report tell me who I was or what I deserved. Because in the end, the only thing I could control was how I answered the question of myself. I would not let him or them define the rest of my days. Not quietly, not without a fight. The first time I sat across from a lawyer in a case that bore my husband's name, I felt as if I were betraying him all over again. Strange, isn't it? Betrayal upon betrayal. He had betrayed me with another family, and yet I still carried a shard of guilt in my chest, as though dragging his secrets into a courtroom was an act of disloyalty. But that was before I realized what was truly at stake. It wasn't just money. It wasn't just property. It wasn't even just the will. It was my dignity, my life as I knew it. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of leather and old paper, with bookshelves lined in dusty tomes that seemed too weighty for any mortal to have actually read. Across from me sat Mr. Halpern, a man in his 60s with thinning white hair and glasses that he was forever sliding up the bridge of his nose. His tone was polite but clipped, as though time itself were billing me by the minute. "We're entering a difficult phase, Mrs. Thompson," he said, sliding a two-way stack of documents across the desk toward me. "Marisol Vega and her children have filed to contest the will. Their attorney argues Daniel provided for them financially, and that this demonstrates intent to include them in the estate." My hands shook as I leafed through the pages. There were bank statements, checks, notes, in Daniel's handwriting. All proof that he had, indeed, supported them. Halpern continued. "The challenge is that while your husband left everything to you in his will, the opposing counsel will attempt to prove that his financial pattern shows a moral, if not legal, obligation to his other dependents. The court may consider this in its ruling." I closed the folder with a snap. "So what are you saying? That his lies could rob me of my home?" He adjusted his glasses. "I'm saying it's possible. But the will is clear. Our strategy will be to uphold the sanctity of that document. It is our strongest weapon." Weapon. The word rang in my ears. This wasn't family anymore. This was war. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Grace and Clara, the folder between us like a bomb. Grace shook her head, her knitting forgotten in her lap. "Oh, Ruthie, how much more must you endure?" Clara, of course, was fuming. I knew it. I knew she wasn't here for peace. That woman didn't come to mourn, she came to claim. Like a snake slithering in after the feast. "She has children, Clara," Grace whispered. "Children who lost their father." "Children raised on stolen money," Clara snapped. "Children who grew fat on Daniel's betrayal while Ruth cooked meals and paid bills with what little he left her. Don't you dare sanctify them." I buried my face in my hands. "Stop, please. Just stop. I can't listen to this fighting anymore." Grace fell silent, tears sliding down her cheeks. Clara muttered curses under her breath. And I sat there, hollow, wondering how my life had turned into a battlefield with no clear sides. The first court hearing arrived sooner than I expected. I wore my black dress, the one I'd worn to Daniel's funeral. It seemed fitting mourning had become my uniform. The courtroom smelled of polish and old wood. High ceilings, flags, the gavel like a symbol of finality. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Halpern at my side, my hands clenched together in my lap. Across from me sat Marisol. Her blouse was pressed, her hair immaculate, her posture composed. She looked like a widow too, though she had never worn the ring. Beside her sat her children, the boy with Daniel's shoulders, the girl with Daniel's eyes. My stomach twisted at the sight of them. Their lawyer stood, a tall man with a voice that carried like a sermon. He painted Daniel as a man of two households, a man who split his devotion, but never abandoned his responsibilities. He spoke of promises, of dependence, of fairness. I sat there, feeling erased. When Halpern spoke, his words were sharp, precise. "The will is clear," he argued. "Mr. Thompson left his estate solely to his lawful wife. While he may have provided financial support elsewhere, that does not negate the legal sanctity of his testament." But the opposing counsel smiled. "Intent, Your Honor. Intent matters. Mr. Thompson's pattern of financial support demonstrates his desire to care for his children. Blood is not erased by ink. Blood, again with the blood." I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. At recess, I stepped into the hallway, my legs trembling. Grace hurried to my side, wrapping me in her arms. "You're doing so well, Ruthie," she whispered. "You're stronger than you know." Clara stood nearby, glaring at Marisol across the corridor. "If looks could kill, she'd be in the ground next to Daniel," Clara muttered. Marisol, for her part, looked back at me. And in her eyes I didn't see grief. I saw triumph. That was the moment I realized she wouldn't stop. Not until she had carved her piece out of what was left of me. And I swore to myself, standing there with Grace's arms around me and Clara's fury at my back, she would not win. Back home, I sat at Daniel's desk, staring at the bank records again. Every transfer to Marisol's account felt like a nail in my coffin. "How could you do this to me, Daniel?" I whispered into the empty room. "How could you build two lives and leave me to pay for them both?" The silence offered no answer. But deep inside, beneath the grief and the rage, a new determination began to harden. If they wanted a war of lawyers and lies, then so be it. I would not let Daniel's betrayal define the rest of my life. Not without a fight. There's a kind of pain that doesn't come in screams or sobs. It comes in silence when you're sitting alone at a desk, staring at numbers on a page, realizing that every digit represents a betrayal you never saw coming. That was the kind of pain that consumed me when I began combing through Daniel's bank statements. I hadn't wanted to do it. God knows I would have rather buried my head in pillows, drowning in tears. But Clara insisted. "Paper trails don't lie," she said, her voice as sharp as broken glass. "Men lie, women lie, families lie, but numbers? They tell the truth." Grace tried to soften it. "Ruthie, maybe leave this to the lawyers. You don't have to carry this alone." But I couldn't leave it alone. I had to know. I had to see for myself just how deep Daniel's betrayal ran. The first folder I opened was from 5 years ago. It seemed harmless. At first, ordinary bills, grocery store purchases, utility payments. But then, there it was, a transfer. $2,500, withdrawn from our joint account and sent to an account under the name Marisol Vega. I stared at the line until the numbers blurred. My stomach twisted, my chest tightening. $2,500. That was almost exactly the amount I'd scraped together that same month to pay off our daughter's college loan. I remembered the sleepless nights, the worry, the extra shifts, and all the while, he'd been sending the same sum to her. I turned the page. Another month, another transfer, and another. The amounts varied, sometimes $1,000, sometimes $5,000. But the pattern was unmistakable, regular, consistent, deliberate. "Clara," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Look." She leaned over my shoulder, her eyes narrowing. Well. Looks like Mr. Perfect Husband was bankrolling his mistress. Figures." Grace gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, Ruthie, this is awful." "Awful?" Clara barked. "This is theft. She stole from Ruth every month, right under her nose." I flinched at her words. I didn't want to see myself as a victim. But staring at those pages, the truth was undeniable. I had been robbed of money, of security, of dignity. The deeper I dug, the worse it became. There were receipts for apartments I'd never known existed, furniture purchases, school tuition fees not for our daughter, but for Marisol's children. Every page was a dagger, every line a wound. At one point, I found a receipt for a necklace. I remembered that month. It was the year of our 20th wedding anniversary. Daniel had given me a pair of modest pearl earrings, and I'd thanked him with tears in my eyes, thinking how thoughtful he was. But here was the truth in black and white. He had also bought a diamond pendant for her. I shoved the receipt away, bile rising in my throat. "God help me," I whispered. "God help me." Grace knelt beside me, wrapping her arms around my shoulders. "Oh, Ruthie, don't do this to yourself. Don't carry his sins on your back." But Clara's voice cut through, fierce and unyielding. "No. Let her see. Let her know exactly what kind of man she married. Because the more she knows, the harder she'll fight when Marisol tries to take what's left. Grace glared at her sister. Clara, enough. Ruth doesn't need fire right now, she needs comfort. And comfort won't save her house, Clara shot back. Comfort won't stop Marisol from dragging her name through the mud. Ruth needs to know the enemy. Their voices clashed above me, but I barely heard them. My eyes were locked on the papers spread across the desk, my tears smudging the ink. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at Daniel's desk long after midnight, the lamp casting a pale glow on the damning evidence. I traced the numbers with my fingertip, as if by touching them I could make them disappear. But they didn't. They never would. The strangest thing was the duality of my grief. I hated him for what he had done, but God help me, I still missed him. I missed his laugh, his touch, his presence beside me in bed. How could a man be both my greatest comfort and my deepest wound? I whispered into the darkness, "Why, Daniel? Why wasn't I enough?" The silence gave no answer. The following morning, the lawyer called. "Mrs. Thompson." Halpern's voice came through the receiver, calm and professional. "I've reviewed the financial records you provided. They are both a curse and a blessing. A curse because they strengthen the other side's claims, but a blessing because they prove Daniel deliberately concealed his actions. That may weigh in your favor regarding intent." I laughed bitterly. "A blessing? Is that what we call it when my husband spent our money on another woman and her children?" There was a pause on the line. "It's what we call leverage," he said quietly. "Leverage. Another weapon in this war." Later that week, we gathered again in the courtroom. Marisol sat across from me, her face serene, her children flanking her. She looked like a woman who believed she had already won. Their lawyer presented the bank records, highlighting the regular payments, the tuition fees, the receipts. He painted the bank, Daniel as a devoted father, a man who secretly provided for his children because he was trapped in a loveless marriage. The words hit like blows. Loveless marriage. Was that how Daniel had described me to her? To them? My heart clenched. Halpern stood, his voice sharp. "Yes, these payments exist. But they do not change the fact that Daniel Thompson's will leaves everything to his lawful wife. Financial support during his life does not equal inheritance after death. The will is final. The rest is noise." The judge listened, impassive. But I felt the stares of the courtroom, the whispers, the judgment. To them, I wasn't a grieving widow anymore. I was the other woman, the wife who had unknowingly shared her husband with another family. And the shame burned hotter than fire. That evening, back home, I collapsed onto the couch, exhausted. Grace sat beside me, holding my hand, her eyes full of sorrow. "Oh, Ruthie," she whispered. "Don't let them rewrite your life. You were his wife. You loved him with your whole heart. That matters, no matter what lies they spin." Clara paced the room, her fists clenched. "Let them lie. Let them spin their stories. We'll fight them with the truth. The will is ours, Ruth. The house is ours. They can't take that." But I wasn't so sure. Because if Daniel could give away our money in secret, if he could split his life between two households without me ever knowing, what else had he hidden? What other secrets still lay buried in those bank statements, waiting to shatter me all over again? The morning of the first full hearing, I dressed like I was preparing for battle. Not in armor, not in steel, but in the black dress I had worn to Daniel's funeral. It clung to me like a second skin, heavy with grief, heavy with memory. Auntie Grace clasped a silver cross around my neck and kissed my cheek. "Remember, Ruthie," she whispered, smoothing my hair as if I were still a child. "You walk in there with your head high. You are his wife. You are the truth." Clara, on the other hand, shoved a folder of documents into my arms. "Remember the facts. Remember the will. If they try to twist sympathy, You anchor yourself in paper. Paper doesn't cry. I stood between them, one speaking to my heart, the other to my head, and me. My stomach was a storm. The courthouse was colder than I imagined, all marble floors and high ceilings that made footsteps echo like accusations. The benches were filled with curious faces, neighbors, acquaintances, even strangers who had caught wind of the scandal. Small towns feed on scandal like wolves on carcasses. I felt their eyes on me as I walked to my seat, Halpern at my side. I felt their whispers crawl over my skin. That's her, the wife who never knew, the fool. When I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands trembling in my lap, I dared a glance across the aisle. There they were. Marisol sat tall, her dark hair pinned in a bun, her blouse crisp, her expression unreadable. To her right, the boy tall, broad-shouldered, jaw clenched tight. To her left, the girl Daniel's eyes staring out from her young face, sharp and defiant. I felt my breath catch. It was like seeing ghosts, not Daniel, but echoes of him, alive and flesh and sitting against me in court. My heart ached, twisted, broke anew. The proceedings began with formality, the judge calling the case, lawyers stating their appearances. Halpern rose, calm and steady, his voice like a scalpel. Your Honor, the matter before us is simple. The decedent, Daniel Thompson, left a valid will naming his wife, Ruth Thompson, as his sole beneficiary. That will is clear, unambiguous, and lawful. The estate should be distributed accordingly. Then Marisol's lawyer stood. He was tall, polished, his voice booming through the chamber like a preacher on Sunday. Your Honor, life is rarely so simple. Yes, there is a will, but there is also evidence. Evidence that Daniel Thompson maintained 2 households, that he provided consistent financial support to my client, Marisol Vega, and their children. Evidence that he intended through his actions, if not his pen, for them to be recognized. The law does not exist in a vacuum. Justice requires more than ink. It requires truth. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. I felt my face burn. My life, my humiliation, being spoken of like a case study. Halpern countered smoothly. Intent is a slippery concept, Your Honor. We do not decide estates on speculation. We decide them on written will. To do otherwise would open the floodgates of chaos. The judge nodded, scribbling notes. But when Marisol's lawyer produced the bank statements, photographs, and even a few of Daniel's letters, the air grew thick. He laid them out like weapons on the table. Look at the pattern, he argued. Monthly payments, school fees, even gifts. This was not charity. This was family. I flinched at that word. Family. Halpern rose, his voice sharp. Even if the court acknowledges financial support, it does not supersede the testamentary will. Mrs. Thompson is the legal spouse, the sole heir. Anything else is conjecture. The judge frowned. We will need to hear testimony. And suddenly, it was no longer just paper and ink. It was voices. It was me. When I took the stand, my knees shook so badly I thought I would collapse. Grace's eyes met mine from the gallery, soft and encouraging. Clara's eyes were fire, daring me to falter. Mrs. Thompson, Marisol's lawyer began, his tone almost kind. You were married to Daniel Thompson for 30 years. Yes, I whispered. During those years, were you aware of his relationship with Miss Vega? My throat closed. No. Not once. Not in 2 decades. Tears burned my eyes. No, I trusted him. I believed him. I had no reason to suspect. A murmur spread through the crowd. The lawyer pressed on. And yet, Mrs. Thompson, the records show thousands of dollars leaving your joint account. Are you telling this court you never noticed? Shame flooded me. I wanted to vanish. He handled the finances. I worked, I contributed, but I let him manage the bills. I didn't question. Clara's fists clenched in the gallery. Grace wept silently. The lawyer's smile was thin. So, to be clear, you left your husband free to spend marital funds as he wished, and he chose to support my client and their children. Would you call that neglect or intent? My chest tightened. I wanted to scream, to shout, to claw my way out of that room. But I forced myself to answer, steady and clear. I would call it betrayal. The courtroom fell silent. When Marisol took the stand, her voice was calm, measured. Daniel was a good man, she said, her eyes flicking briefly toward me. He loved his wife, I'm sure, but he loved me too. He loved our children. He wanted to take care of us, but he was trapped. Trapped in a life he couldn't leave. Her children nodded beside her. The girl looked at me with open disdain. The boy looked down at his hands. Halpern's cross-examination was sharp. Miss Vega, if Daniel intended to leave you part of his estate, why did he not write it into his will? Marisol faltered. He said he would change it. He just didn't have time. Halpern's voice was like ice. So, we are expected to disregard the legal will based on promises made in private? Promises conveniently unverifiable? Marisol's lips tightened. The judge scribbled more notes. By the end of the day, I was drained. My body ached, my spirit hollow. Grace held me as we walked out of the courthouse. Clara stormed ahead, her heels clicking like gunshots. Outside, the press of whispers followed us down the steps. Neighbors, strangers, curious onlookers, all dissecting my life like it was entertainment. At home, I collapsed into a chair. Clara poured herself a whiskey, muttering about vipers and leeches. Grace sat beside me, rubbing my hand. You were brave, Ruthie, she whispered. You spoke your truth. But my truth felt so small against their lies. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The courtroom replayed in my mind, every question, every look, every whisper. And I realized something that made my stomach twist. The law wasn't about right or wrong. It was about who could tell the better story. And if I wasn't careful, I was going to lose mine. People tell you that memory is permanent, like photographs pressed between glass. But I learned in that courtroom that memory is fragile, malleable, something others can bend, reshape, even steal from you if you're not vigilant. That was what the second hearing felt like, my marriage being rewritten in front of strangers, like a novel I thought I had lived but someone else was editing in real time. The day began with Marisol's lawyer pacing before the judge, waving papers, smiling that smug smile as though every word he spoke were gospel. Your Honor, he said, we have not just bank records and letters but witnesses. People who knew Daniel, who can testify to his intent. The truth is simple. Mr. Thompson lived a double life. He was a husband, yes, but also a father, provider, and partner elsewhere. To erase that is to erase the truth. The judge nodded, lips pursed, and called the first witness. It was one of Daniel's old colleagues from the hardware store. A man I barely remembered, quiet, balding, always polite at company parties. He cleared his throat nervously as he took the stand. Yes, I knew Daniel. Worked with him 15 years. He was dependable. Good man. But sometimes he'd leave early. Said he had family things, not his wife, not Ruth. Another family. A ripple of gasps fluttered through the courtroom, my stomach clenched. Did he say the names? The lawyer pressed. The man shifted. Yes, he mentioned Marisol a few times, said she was his responsibility. I wanted to stand up and scream, responsibility. What about me? What about our daughter? but I sat frozen, nails digging into my palms. Halpern rose for cross-examination, voice calm. Sir, did you ever personally meet this other family? No. Did Daniel ever state he intended to leave them his estate? No. Just that he supported them. Thank you. No further questions. I exhaled, my heart pounding. But the damage was done. My marriage had just been reduced, in public, to a man with 2 families. The next witness was worse, a neighbor I had once invited into my home for tea. Mrs. Klein, soft-spoken, elderly, always with a kind smile. Except today, her smile was gone. Did you know Daniel well? The lawyer asked. Oh yes, she said gently. Saw him often. Sometimes, late at night, I'd see him drop a woman off down the street. Not Ruth. Another woman. And children, too. I thought perhaps they were relatives. But now... Her eyes darted toward me, full of pity. Now I realize. My chest felt like it was caving in. To hear it said aloud, in such a calm, matter-of-fact tone, was like being stabbed in slow motion. When Halpern questioned her, he managed to poke holes in her memory. Are you sure it was Daniel? Could it have been someone else? But her words lingered. The image had already been painted. By the afternoon, I felt stripped bare. Witness after witness testified to scraps of Daniel's hidden life. Some vague, some precise. All of them layering over my memories until I began to question myself. Had he really loved me? Or was I just the woman in the shadows of his real family? I remembered our vacations to the lake, the way he held me on the porch swing, whispering promises into the night. But now, I wondered, were those weekends planned around hers? Did he kiss her in the mornings he left me behind with excuses? The courtroom blurred. I wasn't hearing testimony anymore. I was seeing ghosts, ghosts of dinners, holidays, birthdays, rewritten in a cruel new script. During recess, I stumbled into the hallway, barely able to breathe. Grace was at my side in an instant, her arms wrapping around me. "Oh, Ruthie," she whispered, her tears wetting my shoulder. "Don't listen to them. Don't let them steal your memories." But I sobbed into her blouse. What if the memories were lies, Grace? What if I've been clinging to illusions this whole time? Clara stormed over, fire in her eyes. "Don't you dare talk like that, Ruth. You lived that marriage. You cooked those meals. You raised that child. Lies or not, your life was real. Don't let them take that from you." "But if he loved her, then that's his shame," Clara snapped. "Not yours. Don't carry it like a burden on your back." Her words struck something inside me, a spark. Small, but real. Back in the courtroom, it was my turn again. This time, Marisol's lawyer grilled me harder, pressing about specific dates, transactions, absences. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, voice smooth. "Isn't it true your husband often traveled alone?" "Yes," I admitted, my voice shaking. "He said it was for work." "And did you ever confirm that, or did you simply take his word?" Tears filled my eyes. "I trusted him. Trusted him so much that you ignored thousands of dollars vanishing from your accounts." My lips trembled. "I didn't ignore it. I believed he was saving. For retirement, for us." The lawyer smiled thinly. "But it wasn't for you, was it? It was for my client, for their children. Would you call that the act of a husband devoted solely to you?" I broke then, my voice cracked, raw and desperate. "I would call it the act of a liar." Gasps filled the room. The judge banged his gavel for silence. But I didn't care. I had finally said it out loud. Daniel was a liar. That night, back at home, I sat with Grace and Clara in the living room. Grace's eyes were red from crying. Clara paced like a caged animal. "They're twisting everything," I whispered. "They're painting me as blind, as stupid, as unworthy. Let them twist, Clara snapped. The will is our sword. We hold it high. They can't cut through it. Grace took my hand gently. Ruthie, don't let their words erase what you lived. Love was there. Maybe not all of it was true, but some of it was. It had to be. Or else you wouldn't be here now. Her words settled into me like a fragile comfort. Maybe not all of it was true, but maybe some of it was. Lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized something. They could rewrite the past in court. They could parade witnesses and twist narratives. But they couldn't take away what I knew in my bones. That I had given Daniel everything. That I had been faithful. That I had lived my marriage with love, even if he hadn't. And that, in the end, was my truth. No matter how they tried to rewrite it. After the hearing, where my marriage was dissected like evidence in a cold case, I came home carrying a weight I didn't know how to set down. It wasn't just grief anymore. It wasn't just betrayal. It was exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes every breath feel like labor. I dropped my bag by the door and collapsed onto the sofa. For a long time, I stared at nothing, listening to the tick of the clock on the mantel. Each tick was a reminder. Another second lived in the shadow of lies. Another second where Daniel's ghost sat heavier than his memory ever had when he was alive. Grace came first, as always, her gentle knock followed by her soft voice. Ruthie, it's me. She brought a thermos of chicken soup, the kind she always made when I was sick as a child. She sat beside me, opened the lid, and ladled steaming broth into a bowl. Eat, she urged her eyes kind. You can't fight battles on an empty stomach. I took the bowl, more for her sake than mine, and sipped the broth. It tasted like comfort, but comfort couldn't fill the hollow place inside me. Grace brushed my hair back from my face like she used to when I was little. I know you're hurting, Ruthie. I know every word in that courtroom feels like another knife. But you have to hold on to the good, too. To the love you had, to the years that were real. My eyes burned. Were they real, Grace, or were they just lies dressed up as love? She squeezed my hand. Love is never a lie. Maybe Daniel loved badly, maybe he divided his heart, but that doesn't erase the moments he gave you. Don't let his betrayal steal even that. Don't let them take your memories, too. Tears spilled down my cheeks. I don't know if I can separate it anymore. Every time I remember his laugh, I see her face. Every time I think of our vacations, I wonder if he went to her before or after. I can't hold the good without feeling the rot underneath. Grace pulled me into her arms, rocking me gently. Forgive him, Ruthie. Not for him. For you. Because carrying the anger will poison you. Forgive, and let God sort the rest. Her words washed over me like balm, but they didn't sink deep enough. Then came Clara. The front door swung open without warning, as always. She marched in, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. Her eyes were fire, her jaw clenched tight. Well, she barked, tossing her coat onto a chair. Did you hear the circus today? Lies stacked on lies. And you sat there letting them spit on your life. I winced. Clara, please. No, Ruth. No soft voices now. You need steel, not lullabies. Grace will cradle you to death if you let her. You think forgiveness will save you. It won't. Wolves don't respect prayers, they respect teeth. Grace frowned, still holding my hand. Clara, stop. Ruth doesn't need fury, she needs healing. Clara rounded on her. Healing? While that woman plots to strip Ruth of her home? Healing while the whole town whispers that Ruth was blind, foolish, not enough? Healing won't save her. Fighting will. Their voices clashed like thunder and rain, one pounding, one soothing. I covered my ears. Stop! Please, just stop. They both froze, eyes on me. I can't listen to you tear each other apart. I'm already torn in two. Grace says forgive, Clara says fight. And me? I don't even know who I am anymore. Grace's eyes filled with tears. You're Ruthie, my Ruthie. Strong, kind, faithful. Don't forget that. Clara crossed her arms. You're Ruth Thompson, the rightful wife. And if you don't stand tall, they'll bury you alive. That night, I couldn't sleep. Their voices echoed in my head, clashing like waves. Grace whispering, forgive him, Ruthie. Forgive for your own soul. Clara snarling, don't you dare lay down. Fight for what's yours. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, torn between two truths that felt equally impossible. Forgiveness felt like weakness, like letting Daniel and Marisol and the whole town trample me. But vengeance felt corrosive, like it would eat away what was left of me until I was nothing but bitterness. Was there a middle path? Could I forgive and still fight? Could I hold my dignity without drowning in rage? The next hearing came too soon. I walked into the courtroom with Grace on one side, Clara on the other, their presence like angels and demons, whispering in my ears. Marisol sat across the aisle, her children beside her, their lawyer smirking like the outcome was already sealed. As testimony dragged on, I felt my blood boil. Every word was a distortion, every document another nail hammered into the coffin of my life. And then, something inside me snapped. When the lawyer pressed me again, isn't it true you ignored the signs, Mrs. Thompson? That you chose not to? See? I felt Clara's fire ignite in me. I leaned forward, my voice sharp. I trusted my husband. That's not blindness. That's faith. If faith is a crime, then so be it. But don't you dare tell me I was stupid for loving. That's your lie, not mine. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel. But I didn't care. For the first time, I felt both Grace and Clara inside me, the softness of love, the strength of fury. And maybe that was the only way I was going to survive this. Back at home, Clara clapped me on the back, pride blazing in her eyes. That's the Ruth I know. That's the woman who won't be stepped on. Grace smiled softly, tears shining. And that's the Ruthie who still speaks with heart. I'm proud of you, too. I sat between them, exhausted, but with a strange new resolve. Maybe I didn't have to choose between forgiveness and vengeance. Maybe I could carry both Grace's mercy and Clara's fury like two wings. Because if I was going to make it through this storm, I needed both to keep me upright. It began with a box. Not a large box, not some ornate chest with gilded locks, just a plain cardboard box tucked high on the closet shelf in Daniel's old study. I hadn't touched that shelf since his death. It smelled of dust, faintly of cedar, and faintly, achingly, of him. I don't know what compelled me that day. Maybe it was Grace's gentle urging to clean out the cobwebs, Ruthie. Let the house breathe again. Maybe it was Clara's constant insistence that men like him always leave more mess than you first think. Or maybe it was just me, restless, desperate to feel like I had some control over anything in my life. Whatever it was, I climbed the step stool, pulled the box down, and set it on the desk. At first it was nothing, old receipts, birthday cards, a stack of letters tied with string. But then, beneath it all, I found an envelope. Thick, heavy, my name not written on the front. Instead, scrawled in Daniel's unmistakable hand were 3 words, "Last will draft." My breath caught. My hands trembled. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. And then, with shaking fingers, I opened it. The paper inside was formal, notarized, dated 2 years earlier than the will Halpern had read to me after Daniel's death. My eyes scanned the words, and with each line, the blood drained from my face. Unlike the final will, this draft divided the estate, half to me, half to Marisol and her children. I sank into the chair, the room spinning, my heart slammed against my ribs. So he had thought about it, planned for it, considered them, considered her, considered leaving me to share what I had built my life around. Tears blurred the page. I whispered aloud, as if Daniel could hear me. Why? Why would you leave this, hidden, like a ghost waiting to destroy me? Grace was the first I called. She arrived within the hour, her knitting forgotten in her bag, her eyes wide with worry. Oh, Ruthie, she breathed when I showed her the papers. Oh, dear God. Her hand flew to her mouth, her tears immediate. She wrapped her arms around me, rocking me gently. Maybe he changed his mind, sweetheart. Maybe that's why he wrote the final will in your favor. He realized his mistake. But her words felt like gauze on a bullet wound, too soft, too fragile. Clara barged in next, summoned by my frantic call. She snatched the paper from my desk and read it with narrowed eyes, her jaw clenched, her nostrils flaring. That bastard, she spat. He was going to cut you in half. He was going to give your life, your house, your sweat to her. And then he hid it, because deep down, he knew it was wrong. Her voice was thunder. Grace's was rain. And me? I was drowning between them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat with the draft will in my lap, the final will beside it. Two versions of Daniel's truth. Two versions of my life. Which one was real? Which one reflected his heart? Did he truly choose me, in the end? Or did death simply rob him of the chance to betray me on paper the way he had in flesh? I whispered into the dark, my tears staining the pages. What did you want, Daniel? Who did you love? Who was your family? The silence answered, cold and merciless. The next morning, I brought both wills to Halpern. He sat behind his desk, glasses perched on his nose, his brow furrowed as he examined the documents. This is problematic, he said at last. My stomach dropped. Problematic how? He tapped the earlier draft. This will is not the one entered into probate. It was superseded by the later version, the one that leaves everything to you. Legally, that is your strongest ground. But, I pressed, my voice trembling. He sighed. But the existence of this draft will bolster the opposing counsel's claims. It demonstrates Daniel did, at one point, intend to provide for Marisol and her children. That intent may weigh heavily with the court. I gripped the edge of the desk. So this could cost me everything. Not everything, he said carefully, but it weakens us. And if the other side gets hold of it, I buried my face in my hands. The thought of Marisol's smug smile when she saw this proof of Daniel's divided loyalties was unbearable. Halpern leaned forward. The question is, Mrs. Thompson, do we disclose it ourselves, or do we risk them discovering it? The air felt heavy, suffocating. I didn't know what to say. That evening, Grace and Clara sat with me at the kitchen table, the draft will lying between us like a serpent. Grace stroked my hand gently. Maybe honesty is best, Ruthie. Better they hear it from you than as some weapon sprung against you later. Clara slammed her fist on the table. Honesty? Are you mad? This is dynamite. Handing it over would be suicide. Burn it, Ruth. Burn it, before it burns you. I looked from one sister to the other, my heart tearing in two. Grace's plea for truth, Clara's call for destruction. Forgiveness versus fury. Light versus fire. And me? I didn't know which path to take. That night, I sat by the fireplace, the draft will trembling in my hands. The flames crackled, licking at the logs, daring me to feed them Daniel's lies. I hovered there, torn between tossing it into the fire and locking it away forever, between exposing the truth and burying it with him. My heart pounded, my breath shook. In the end, I couldn't do it. I couldn't burn it. Because some part of me needed it, not as a weapon, not as evidence, but as proof. Proof that my instincts had been right, that my pain wasn't imagined. Proof that Daniel had truly lived 2 lives, and that I had never really known him at all. I folded the draft will carefully, slid it into an envelope, and locked it in the desk drawer. It wasn't gone. It wasn't forgotten. It was waiting for the moment it would rise like a ghost and haunt me again. If there was one thing I thought I was prepared for, it was hearing lies about Daniel. I had already been force-fed betrayal, already seen the receipts, the bank statements, the draft will. I thought nothing could shock me anymore. I was wrong. Because nothing cut deeper than hearing his children, his other children, stand in that courtroom and speak of him as though I were the stranger and they were the rightful heirs of his love. The morning of their testimony, I could barely eat. Grace fussed over me in the kitchen, setting a plate of scrambled eggs before me. "Just a few bites, Ruthie. Keep your strength," she urged. Clara snorted from her place by the window, arms crossed. "Strength doesn't come from eggs, it comes from backbone. And today, you're going to need all of yours." I pushed the plate away, my stomach too knotted to manage even a bite. Backbone won't stop their words from cutting me. "Clara." She walked over and laid a hand on my shoulder, surprisingly gentle. "No, but it will stop you from bleeding out." The courtroom was packed, more so than usual. The air buzzed with anticipation, like the whole town had gathered for a play, eager for the next act in this tragedy. Marisol sat at her table, her children flanking her. The boy David, I later learned, looked every inch his father's son. Broad-shouldered, strong-jawed, his expression hardened like stone. The girl Isabel was smaller, but her eyes. Lord help me, those eyes. They were Daniel's eyes, sharp and piercing, the same eyes that had once looked at me with love. Seeing them was like being stabbed by memory. When the bailiff swore David in, he sat tall, his chin lifted in defiance. "State your name for the record," the lawyer prompted. "David Vega," he answered firmly. "And your relationship to the deceased, Daniel Thompson?" A pause, deliberate. "He was my father." The words hit me like a hammer. I knew it, of course. I had known it since the truth came out. But hearing it spoken aloud, in that solemn room, in that deep voice so much like Daniel's, it tore something inside me that I didn't know was still whole. The lawyer guided him through his testimony. "David, can you tell the court about your relationship with your father?" David straightened. "He was there for us. Maybe not always publicly, but he made sure we had what we needed. He paid for my schooling, my sports, even the car I drive now. He told me he was proud of me." He glanced across the room, his eyes meeting mine. Hard, accusing. "He told me he wished he could be more open about us. That one day, things would change." The lawyer nodded solemnly. "And did he ever express his intent regarding his estate?" David hesitated, then spoke firmly. "He said he wouldn't abandon us. He said he'd make sure we were provided for, even after he was gone." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My stomach twisted. Halpern rose to cross-examine. "David, do you have any written proof of these promises?" "No," he admitted. "Did he ever tell you his exact plans for his will?" "No. But I know what he said." Halpern's voice sharpened. "So, we are to take your memory colored by grief and loyalty as stronger evidence than a signed, notarized will." David's jaw clenched. "I know my father better than she did." He pointed at me. The room erupted in whispers. My face burned, hot tears welling in my eyes. Better than I did. The knife twisted. Then came Isabel. She was younger, softer around the edges, but her eyes blazed with the fire of youth. When she took the stand, she didn't even glance my way. Isabel Vega, she said proudly when asked her name. And your relationship to Daniel Thompson? He was my father, she said, her voice steady. He loved me. The lawyer smiled gently. Can you tell us how he showed that love? She nodded, her lips trembling as tears filled her eyes. He came to my school recitals. He sent me letters when he couldn't be there. He gave me books, wrote notes inside the covers. He said he wished he could sit in the front row like other dads, but he couldn't. Not because he didn't want to, but because of her. Her finger pointed, straight at me, gasps again. My heart shattered. He said she wouldn't understand. Isabel continued, her tears falling freely, that she would hate us, that she would hate me. I wanted to leap up, to scream, no, that's not true. I didn't even know you existed. But the words stuck in my throat, strangled by grief and shame. Halpern's cross-examination was gentler this time. Isabel, did your father ever show you his will? No. Did he ever say you would inherit his estate? No, but he promised he'd always take care of me. Doesn't that count? Her voice, cracked, raw, and desperate. The courtroom seemed to lean toward her, their sympathy a tide I could not fight. I sat there, frozen, my tears streaming silently. When the session ended, I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air. Grace was there instantly, wrapping me in her arms. "Oh, Ruthie, don't let their words break you," she whispered, her tears mingling with mine. "They're just children, grieving, lashing out. They don't know the whole truth." But Clara stormed in, furious. "Children, they're vipers, spitting poison into the court, tarnishing your name. Don't you dare let them play the victim, Ruth. They're part of her army now." "They're his children," I whispered, my voice raw. "His blood. How can I hate them when they never asked for this? How can I blame them for wanting what he promised?" Grace stroked my hair, murmuring prayers. Clara cursed under her breath, pacing like a lioness ready to strike. And me? I was caught in the middle, drowning in the voices of two young people who bore Daniel's features but none of my memories. That night, I lay awake, replaying their words. He was my father. He loved me. He said she would hate us. Was that what Daniel had told them? That I would be the villain, the cruel wife who kept him from them? Had he really poisoned their hearts against me, even as he lay in my bed, kissed my cheek, called me his love? The thought was unbearable. For the first time, I wondered if I had been nothing more than a shadow in Daniel's true story, not the heroine, not even the partner. Just the obstacle he wrote me as, in someone else's script. If the courtroom was a battlefield, the town was the theater. And in that theater, I had become the unwilling star of a scandal everyone wanted to watch. The first sign came at the grocery store. I had gone in for something small, just bread and milk, but the moment I walked through the sliding doors, I felt it. Eyes. Too many eyes. Mrs. Donnelly, who used to chat with me in the produce aisle, suddenly found the apples fascinating. The cashier whispered to another as I approached, their heads bending close, their laughter sharp as broken glass. And then, as I placed the bread on the belt, I heard it low but clear enough. She didn't even know. 30 years and she didn't know. Heat flushed my cheeks. My fingers trembled as I swiped my card. I wanted to shout, "What would you have done? Could you have seen through his lies?" But I bit my tongue, grabbed my bag and fled. The milk soured in my cart before I even reached home. A week later, it was the church. I had sat in the same pew for decades, beside Daniel, beneath the same stained glass window. But now, when I slid into the bench, people shifted. A couple I'd known since high school leaned away as though grief were contagious. The sermon that morning was about truth and deception, about how the wages of sin reach beyond the sinner. I could feel the words pierce me like darts, though I knew Father James hadn't written them for me specifically. Still, when he spoke of families destroyed by hidden lives, every head seemed to turn my way. Afterward, Grace squeezed my hand. "Don't let it get to you, Ruthie. They don't know your heart." But as we walked through the churchyard, I heard another whisper. "Poor thing. Or maybe she just pretends she didn't know." The ground might as well have opened beneath me. At home, Clara was ready with her fire. "Let them talk," she snarled, pacing the living room. "They're all hypocrites. Half their husbands probably sneak around too, they're just better at hiding it. If the town wants a villain, let them paint Marisol instead." Grace frowned, smoothing the tablecloth with trembling fingers. "Clara, enough. Ruth doesn't need more venom. She needs peace." "Peace?" Clara scoffed. "While they tear her apart in whispers? Peace is a luxury, Grace. What Ruth needs is armor." I sat between them, my chest tight. "I can't fight every whisper, Clara. I can't chase every rumor down." Her eyes blazed. "Then stop caring. Hold your head high, walk into every store, every church, every courtroom like you own the ground. Let them choke on their gossip." But Grace touched my cheek gently. "Or let them see your kindness, Ruthie. Outshine their whispers with grace. That's the only way to win hearts." Two paths again. Fire and mercy. And me, lost somewhere between them. But the worst came at the diner. It was a Saturday morning, and I had gone in hoping for something normal, a cup of coffee, maybe a plate of pancakes to remind me of simpler times. I sat at the counter, staring at the laminated menu, when two women slid into the booth behind me. I recognized their voices instantly, neighbors from down the street. "I heard the daughter called her out in court," one said. "Oh yes. Said the wife would have hated them anyway. Poor kids. Imagine growing up hidden like that. And Ruth? She must have known." "You can't be that blind. Maybe she just ignored it, didn't want to lose the money." Laughter. My throat tightened, my vision blurring. I stood abruptly, tossing a few bills on the counter, and fled before they could see my tears. Outside, I collapsed against the hood of my car, gasping for breath. The town wasn't just whispering, they were rewriting me, just as the courtroom had rewritten my marriage. I wasn't the faithful wife anymore. I was the fool, the accomplice, maybe even the villain. That evening, Grace found me staring blankly at the wall. She knelt beside me, her voice soft. "Ruthie, you can't let them define you. You know who you are. God knows who you are." But my voice cracked, raw. Do I know? Or am I just the woman who couldn't see the truth under her own roof? Maybe they're right. Maybe I was blind. Maybe I was nothing. Grace's eyes filled with tears. She pulled me close, whispering prayers into my hair. Clara stormed in moments later, her anger like a storm. "Enough of this self-pity. So the town talks, let them choke on their gossip. They don't know what it's like to live with betrayal carved into your bones. You want to silence them, Ruth? Win the case. Walk into that courtroom and crush Marisol's claims. Then watch how fast the whispers turn to pity for her." Her fury lit something in me, even as Grace's gentleness soothed another part of me. And I realized I couldn't control the town. I couldn't stop the whispers. But I could decide whose voice I listened to, not theirs, mine. That night, I stood at the window staring out at the street where neighbors passed, their silhouettes flickering under the street lamps. I whispered into the dark, "You don't know me. You don't know my love. You don't know my pain." And for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange strength return. They could whisper all they wanted, but the only truth that mattered was the one I chose to carry. By the time the 14th hearing rolled around, I had grown numb to the rhythm of the courthouse. The echo of footsteps on marble, the rustle of papers, the murmur of spectators, it all blended into a constant hum, like a storm I could never escape. But that day the storm grew teeth. Because for the first time, the judge himself looked at me not with indifference, not with the polite detachment of the law, but with a weight that pressed against my chest like a stone. The session began as usual. Halpern laid out his arguments with calm precision, emphasizing the sanctity of the will. Marisol's lawyer countered with fire and sympathy, pointing again to Daniel's financial support, the testimonies of his children. Then, as if struck by some unseen chord, the judge set down his pen and folded his hands. His eyes fixed on me. "Mrs. Thompson," he said slowly, his voice deep and measured, "I want to speak plainly. This case is not as straightforward as you may wish it to be." A hush fell over the room. My breath caught in my throat. The judge continued. "The will is clear, yes. Legally binding, yes. But the evidence presented, the financial support, the testimonies, the witnesses creates a picture that cannot be ignored. If further evidence were to surface, particularly documentation showing intent to divide the estate," his gaze sharpened, "it could alter the outcome entirely." I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. Because I knew exactly what he meant. The draft will. Hidden in my desk drawer, burning a hole in my conscience. Halpern rose quickly. "Your Honor, with respect, the law cannot bend to speculation. Unless such documentation exists and is entered into evidence, it has no bearing." The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Perhaps, but I urge you, Mr. Halpern, and your client, Mrs. Thompson, to consider carefully. Surprises in probate cases rarely favor the unprepared." His eyes flicked to me once more, sharp as knives. "If there are any documents yet undisclosed, you would do well to bring them forward voluntarily. Transparency can weigh heavily in the court's favor." The gavel struck. Recess. I stumbled into the hallway, the walls closing in on me. Grace hurried after me, her hand clutching mine. "Ruthie, breathe. You're shaking." My voice cracked. "He knows, Grace. Somehow, he knows." Clara caught up, her eyes blazing. "Knows what? What are you hiding, Ruth?" I stared at her, trembling. I wanted to deny it, to lie, but the words spilled out before I could stop them. "The draft will," I whispered. "I found it. Weeks ago. It splits the estate half to me, half to them." Grace gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh, Ruthie." Clara's face hardened. "And you didn't burn it." "I couldn't," I sobbed. "I needed it. I needed proof that I wasn't crazy, that he really meant to betray me." Clara grabbed my shoulders, shaking me. "That paper is a noose around your neck. If Marisol's lawyer gets it, you're finished." Grace pulled her away, tears in her eyes. "Don't shout at her. Can't you see she's broken already?" But Clara's fury wouldn't be softened. Broken or not, she needs to choose. Keep it hidden and pray it never surfaces, or give it up now and hope honesty saves her. The hallway spun around me. My knees buckled, and I clung to Grace just to stay upright. That night, I sat at Daniel's desk again, the draft will in my hands. The paper felt heavier than stone. The judge's words echoed in my ears. Transparency can weigh heavily in the court's favor. I imagined Marisol's triumphant smile if her lawyer unveiled it in court. I imagined the gasps, the headlines, the whispers, "Wife knew and hid it." But I also imagined the judge's face if I came forward myself. Would he see me as honest, or as a fool who waited too long? Grace sat beside me, her hand on mine. Ruthie, honesty is a light. It may hurt, but it purifies. If you hide it, the darkness will consume you. Clara paced the room, her fists clenched. Don't you dare. You think honesty will save you. No. Honesty will hand them the rope to hang you. Keep it buried. Their voices clashed around me, and I wanted to scream. Instead, I whispered, what if there is no right choice? What if either way I lose? Grace kissed my forehead, tears spilling. Then choose what lets you sleep at night. Clara slammed her fist on the desk. Or choose what keeps you standing when the vultures circle. And me? I sat there, trembling, the draft will in my lap, my soul split in two. Sleep never came. I sat by the window until dawn, the envelope still in my hands. Outside, the town stirred awake, their whispers waiting for the next act of this tragedy. Inside, I whispered into the pale light, Daniel, what do you want from me? Haven't you taken enough? But there was no answer, only silence, and the weight of a decision I wasn't ready to make. I used to think grief was the worst thing a heart could endure. But grief, I learned, is just one note in a darker symphony. There's betrayal, shame, anger, humiliation, and despair, and when they all play together, they create a song, so deafening it drowns out everything else. That was the music of my life when I reached the breaking point. It started in the courthouse, again. The hearing dragged on, endless, the air heavy with tension. Marisol's lawyer brought out more witnesses, more letters, more whispers from the grave. One by one, they painted Daniel as a devoted father, a secret provider, a man torn between two loves. And me? I was reduced to the obstacle, the ignorant wife who stood in the way of his true family. Every word landed like a blow. When Halpern rose to defend me, his voice calm and sharp, I tried to hold on. The will is clear, he repeated like scripture. Whatever Daniel Thompson may have done in life, he chose, in the end, to leave everything to his wife. That must stand. But the words no longer felt strong enough, not when the whole room leaned toward Marisol's story, nodding in sympathy. Then came the cruelest moment. Marisol's lawyer held up a photographed Daniel with her children at a birthday party. He was laughing, holding a cake, his arms around them. This, the lawyer declared, is not a man indifferent to his children. This is not a man who intended to abandon them. This is a father, Your Honor. And fathers do not write wills that erase their children. Gasps filled the room. My heart stopped. Because that was my Daniel in that picture, the same smile, the same laugh, the same twinkle in his eyes I had once believed belonged only to me. I broke. Right there on the bench, in front of the whole court, I broke. My sobs erupted, loud and uncontrollable. I clutched my chest, gasping for air, my body shaking. The judge called a recess. Grace rushed to my side, wrapping her arms around me. Clara stood behind her, her fists clenched, her eyes blazing at the other table. But I couldn't stop crying. Couldn't stop choking on the truth that the man I had loved for 30 years had lived a life so full, so warm, so whole without me. They led me into the hallway, where I collapsed against the wall. Grace held my face in her hands, whispering prayers, rocking me gently. Breathe, Ruthie, please, just breathe. Clara stood nearby, furious. Look at her. Look what they're doing to her. This is murder, slow and public. If I had a knife, Clara. Grace snapped. Not here, not now. But Clara's fury wouldn't quiet. This has gone too far. They're killing her, Grace, piece by piece, and she's letting them. Her words stung because they were true. I was letting them. Letting their voices rewrite me, letting their stories suffocate me. I whispered through my sobs. Maybe I should give up. Let them have it all. The money, the house, everything. Maybe then they'll stop. Grace gasped, her tears spilling. No, Ruthie, don't talk like that. But Clara stepped forward, her face hard. If you give up, you'll die anyway, maybe not in body, but in spirit. And then Daniel wins. Then Marisol wins. Then every whisper in this cursed town wins. Do you want that? I shook my head, trembling. I just want peace. Then fight for it, Clara barked. But her fire felt too hot. Grace's softness felt too thin. And me? I was just ash between them. That night, at home, I wandered through the rooms like a ghost. The walls seemed to close in, every picture frame mocking me. Daniel's smile in the photographs looked different now, secretive, almost smug. I ended up in the bathroom, staring at myself in the mirror. My face was pale, hollow. My eyes, red-rimmed and swollen. "Who are you?" I whispered. "What's left of you?" No answer, just the hum of the light above me. I slid down to the floor, hugging my knees to my chest, and sobbed until my throat was raw. Grace found me the next morning, still on the floor. She knelt beside me, her voice trembling. "Ruthie, please, don't let this destroy you. You're stronger than this, I know you are." But I couldn't meet her eyes. What if I'm not, Grace? What if I've been pretending my whole life, pretending to be strong, pretending to be loved, pretending to be enough? Her tears fell freely. "You are enough. You always were. His lies don't change your worth." Clara stormed in, then, arms crossed. "Get up, Ruth. Enough of this pity. Crying on the floor won't win you the case. Won't win you respect. You want to survive? Then act like it." Her harshness burned, but somewhere deep inside, it lit a spark. The breaking point didn't destroy me. It remade me. Because when you fall apart completely, when every piece of your life is shattered, you see what's left when the dust clears. And what was left, deep in my chest, was a truth neither Grace nor Clara could speak for me. I wasn't fighting for Daniel anymore. Not for his memory. Not for his lies. I was fighting for me. For the woman who had been faithful. For the wife who had given her all. For the person who deserved to stand tall, no matter what anyone whispered. That night, I stood before the mirror again. My face was still pale, my eyes still swollen. But when I whispered, "Who are you?" this time the answer came back, faint but real. "I'm Ruth." And Ruth wasn't finished yet. If Grace was the balm that soothed my wounds, Clara was the fire that cauterized them. And after my breaking point, she decided there would be no more soothing. She came into my house one evening carrying a folder so thick it looked like a weapon. She dropped it onto the dining table with a thud, startling me and Grace both. "There," she declared, planting her hands on her hips. "That's how we end this." Grace frowned, still holding her tea. "Clara, what are you doing?" "What you should have been doing all along," Clara snapped. "I'm saving Ruth's life." I stared at the folder, my stomach twisting. "What is it?" Clara pulled out the papers one by one, her eyes blazing. Background checks, property records, financial statements. I've been digging. And guess what? Marisol's no saint. She's been living off Daniel's money for years, yes, but she's also been hiding things. Things the court needs to know. The first document she slid toward me was a bank statement. "See here. Deposits from Daniel. But also, mysterious withdrawals. Thousands, disappearing into accounts that don't match her name." I blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means," Clara said, her smile sharp as a knife, "she may have been siphoning money for herself, not just for the children. And if we can prove that, we paint her not as the noble, abandoned partner she pretends to be, but as a thief." Grace gasped softly. "Clara, that's dangerous. What if it backfires? What if the court thinks Ruth is just smearing her out of desperation?" Clara slammed her palm on the table. Better to strike than sit meekly while they skin her alive. Do you want Ruth to lose everything? To walk away with nothing but shame? Grace's lips trembled. No, of course not, but there's more at stake than money. There's Ruth's soul. My hands shook as I picked up the paper. Numbers stared back at me, cold and relentless. Could it be true? Had Marisol not only taken Daniel's devotion but stolen beyond even that? The next document Clara thrust forward was even worse. Photographs. This, she said, stabbing her finger at one picture, is Marisol with another man. 2 years ago. Look familiar? He's her landlord, or should I say, her lover. Grace covered her mouth in shock. Clara, no. Oh yes, Clara growled. While Daniel was bleeding Ruth dry, Marisol was entertaining another man in her apartment. And yet she dares sit in court painting herself as the faithful partner left destitute. Lies. All lies. I stared at the photograph, my heart pounding. The image was grainy, taken from a distance, but it was unmistakable Marisol, laughing, her hand on another man's arm. My emotions twisted: rage, vindication, sorrow, all tangled together. Grace shook her head. This feels wrong. To drag her down like this, to expose her private life. She exposed Ruth's, Clara snapped. Dragged her name through the mud in front of the whole town. What mercy do vipers deserve? None. That night, I couldn't sleep. Clara's folder lay on the table like a live bomb. Grace had gone home in tears, whispering prayers that I wouldn't lose myself in vengeance. Clara had stayed late, pacing the floor, urging me to act. Use it, Ruth, she said fiercely. Show the judge who Marisol really is. End this. But when I was finally alone, I sat staring at the photographs and the bank statements, my chest aching. If I used them, I might win. But at what cost? Would I become as cruel as they said I was? Would I prove Daniel right? If he had really told them I would hate them, that I would lash out with venom. I closed my eyes, whispering into the dark. God, show me what to do. Because I don't know anymore. I don't know who I'm becoming. The next day in court, I carried the folder in my bag. Its weight was unbearable, like carrying a loaded gun. As testimony droned on, I felt it pressing against me, daring me to unleash it. Halpern leaned close at one point, whispering, "Do you have something you haven't shown me?" I hesitated. My lips parted, then closed again. Maybe. He studied me, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. If you do, we must discuss it carefully. Surprises can backfire. I nodded, but my heart raced. Across the room, Marisol sat serene, her children at her side, their eyes still full of hate for me. She looked untouchable, righteous, untarnished, and my fingers itched toward the folder. That evening, Grace and Clara confronted me again. Grace's voice trembled as she pleaded. "Ruthie, don't do it. Don't let anger poison you. Win or lose, you must be able to live with yourself afterward." Clara's eyes blazed. "Don't listen to her. She'll have you singing hymns while they take your house. Use the evidence, Ruth. Strike first. Strike hard." Their voices clashed like thunder and rain, one soothing, one searing. And me? I sat in the middle, drowning. I whispered, almost to myself, "What if I can't win without it?" Grace gripped my hand. "Then maybe the lesson is in losing with grace." Clara slammed her fist on the table. "No, the lesson is that Ruth Thompson doesn't kneel to liars and thieves. You want to survive? Then fight dirty if you must. Because that's what they're doing." I looked down at the folder, the weight of it burning into my palms. I didn't know which path I would choose. But I knew this, one way or another, Clara's gambit had changed everything. Grace had always been the soft place I could fall. All my life, she'd been the one to hold me when I cried, to whisper prayers over me when the world felt too heavy. Even in the storm of Daniel's betrayal, she was the calm voice reminding me not to let bitterness win. But even the gentlest soul has a breaking point. And Grace reached hers the night Clara's folder became the centerpiece of our lives. We sat at the kitchen table, the folder lying between us like a live snake. Clara had just stormed out after another argument, muttering curses about cowardice and wasted opportunities. Grace and I were alone, the silence thick and heavy. She reached across the table, taking my hands in hers. Her eyes were red, her face weary. "Ruthie," she said softly, "I need you to listen to me. Truly listen, not just hear my words." I nodded, though my chest tightened. "You're standing at a crossroads," she continued. "One path is Clara's vengeance, exposure, tearing Marisol down until she has nothing left. The other is mine, mercy, honesty, trusting that truth will hold, even if it means you lose." Tears pricked my eyes. "Grace, I don't know if I have mercy left in me." She squeezed my hands tighter. "Then let God lend you his. Because if you walk Clara's path, if you use that folder, you will win, maybe. But you will lose yourself in the process. And I can't watch that happen to you, Ruthie. Not after everything." Her voice broke, trembling with emotion. I looked away, staring at the folder. What if I don't use it, and I lose everything? The house, the security, my name. What then, Grace? What's left of me? Her tears spilled freely. What's left is your soul. What's left is the woman I love, the Ruth who raised her child with dignity, who gave her marriage her whole heart, who walked through fire and didn't come out bitter. That's worth more than any inheritance. Her words cut deep. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe mercy was enough. But Clara's voice echoed in my head. "They'll skin you alive if you don't fight back." I whispered, "What if you're wrong, Grace? What if mercy just makes me weak? What if they laugh at me, call me a fool, and take it all anyway?" Grace's eyes darkened, not with anger, but with a grief I had never seen in her before. "Then so be it," she said quietly. "Better to be a fool with a clean heart than a victor with a poisoned one." I stared at her, stunned. Grace had never spoken so sharply to me. The days that followed were unbearable. Grace grew quiet, watching me with worried eyes every time I picked up the folder. At meals, she prayed longer, her words more desperate. One night, as we washed the dishes together, she finally broke. "Ruthie," she said, her voice trembling, "I can't stand by and watch you become someone you're not. If you use that evidence to destroy Marisol, if you take the path of vengeance, I don't know if I can stay by your side." The plate slipped from my hands, shattering in the sink. I turned to her, shocked. "Grace, you wouldn't leave me." Her tears flowed freely. "Don't make me, Ruthie. Don't make me choose between loving you and watching you destroy yourself." Her words gutted me, because I realized she wasn't giving me advice anymore, she was giving me an ultimatum. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Grace's ultimatum echoed in my mind, clashing with Clara's fiery demands. On one side, mercy, forgiveness, a clean heart, even if it meant losing. On the other, vengeance, victory, survival no matter the cost. And me? I was torn in two, my soul stretched to the breaking point. I whispered into the darkness, my voice raw. "Daniel, look at what you've done. Look at what you've left me with. Was this your plan? To pit mercy against vengeance, to tear my family apart even after you were gone." The silence answered, merciless as always. The next morning, Grace came to me again. She held my hands, her eyes pleading. "Ruthie, I love you. But I need you to promise me something. Promise me you won't let Clara push you into darkness. Promise me you'll choose the light." I stared at her, my heart breaking. I don't know if I can, Grace. I don't know if I'm strong enough. She kissed my forehead, whispering through her tears. Then let me be strong for you. Let me hold the light until you can see it again. Her love washed over me, fierce and fragile. And in that moment, I realized the truth. No matter what choice I made, I risked losing someone I loved. Grace if I chose vengeance, Clara if I chose mercy, and me if I chose nothing at all. There are moments in life when the ground shifts beneath you, when the world you thought was steady cracks open and swallows you whole. I had already lived through Daniel's betrayal, the draft will, the courtroom humiliations. I thought I had seen every secret, every shadow. But nothing prepared me for the revelation that came next. It was a gray morning, the courthouse buzzing louder than usual. I felt it in the air, a tension, an anticipation. Grace held my hand tightly, whispering prayers under her breath. Clara marched ahead of us, sharp and unyielding, as if her fury alone could bulldoze the case into submission. Halpern met us at the doors, his face unreadable. There may be developments today, he said quietly. My stomach twisted. What kind of developments? He adjusted his glasses. The other side filed new evidence late last night. I haven't seen it yet. My blood turned cold. The folder in my desk drawer suddenly burned in my mind. Had they found it? Had the draft will surfaced despite all my torment? I whispered, God, no. The hearing began as usual. The judge called us to order, his gavel echoing through the chamber. Marisol's lawyer rose, his voice smooth as silk. Your Honor, new evidence has come to light. Evidence that speaks directly to Daniel Thompson's intentions regarding his estate. He held up a sealed envelope. My heart stopped. This document, he continued, was discovered among Daniel's personal papers by a former associate. It is, we believe, an alternate draft of his will. Gasps filled the room. My chest constricted. Grace squeezed my hand so tightly it hurt. Clara muttered curses under her breath. The judge examined the envelope, then nodded. Proceed. The lawyer unfolded the paper, his voice ringing out. Dated 3 years prior to the final will, this draft clearly divides the estate, half to Ruth Thompson, his lawful wife, and half to Marisol Vega and their children. My worst fear, spoken aloud for all to hear. The room erupted. Whispers, gasps, heads turning. I felt their eyes burn into me, accusing, pitying, judging. The judge banged his gavel for silence. Order! But the damage was done. Halpern rose swiftly, his voice firm. Your Honor, while this document may exist, it is not the final will. The later, legally binding testament leaves the entirety of the estate to Mrs. Thompson. This earlier draft is superseded and irrelevant. But Marisol's lawyer smiled like a cat with cream. Irrelevant? Or illuminating? This draft proves Daniel wrestled with his loyalties that he intended, at least at one point, to provide for his children. Can we truly believe he meant to abandon them entirely? The judge frowned, tapping his gavel lightly. The court will consider this carefully. My blood ran cold. During recess, I stumbled into the hallway, shaking. Grace wrapped her arms around me, tears streaming down her face. Oh, Ruthie! Oh, sweetheart, she whispered. But Clara stormed up, her fury volcanic. Did you know about this? She demanded, her eyes drilling into me. I froze, my heart pounding. She saw the answer in my silence. Her face twisted in rage. You had it all along, and you didn't use it. And now look, they've beaten you to it. Grace gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Ruthie, oh my God. I broke then. I collapsed against the wall, sobbing. I couldn't destroy it. I couldn't bring myself to burn it. I needed proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that he really betrayed me. Clara's voice was fire. "And now it's proof that might cost you everything. Do you see, Ruth? Do you see what mercy has done?" Grace knelt beside me, her tears falling. "No, Clara, mercy hasn't ruined her. Secrets have, lies have. Daniel's lies, not Ruth's." But her words were drowned out by my sobs. Back in court, the draft will lay on the judge's bench like a loaded gun. Marisol sat tall, her lips curved in the faintest smile. Her children looked vindicated, their eyes burning into me as if I were the thief, the interloper, the liar. Halpern argued valiantly. He emphasized the supremacy of the final will, the legal weight of its date and notarization. He hammered on the law like a shield, but I could feel it slipping. I could feel the tide turning. And as I sat there, trembling, I realized the cruelest truth of all. Daniel had written 2 stories, one where I was his sole heir, his chosen wife, and one where I was forced to share the life I had built with another family. And even in death, he had left me to fight for which story the world would believe. That night, at home, I sat with Grace and Clara at the table once more. The draft will was back in my hands, heavier than ever. Grace wept quietly, her voice soft. "Ruthie, this isn't your fault. You didn't write it. You didn't hide it to hurt anyone. Daniel did this. His lies did this." Clara slammed her fist on the table. "His lies, yes. But now they're using them to bury you. And unless you strike back, they'll win." Her eyes burned into mine. "The time for mercy is over. Use my folder. Expose Marisol. Tear her apart before she tears you apart." Grace's tears fell harder. "If you do, Ruthie, you'll lose yourself, and I'll lose you. Please, don't let him take your soul too." Their voices clashed, thunder and rain, fire and mercy. And me? I sat in the middle, broken, trembling, the draft will in my hands, the photographs and bank statements in Clara's folder, whispering like demons from the shadows. And I knew, whatever choice I made next would decide everything. The courthouse smelled of polish and paper, but to me it smelled of endings. Endings of marriages, endings of reputations, maybe even endings of who I thought I was. The case had dragged on for months, draining me of tears, money, and strength, and now the judge was preparing to decide. But I wasn't ready, because I still hadn't chosen. Clara's folder lay in my bag, heavy as sin. Bank statements, photographs, proof of Marisol's own secrets. A weapon sharp enough to cut her to pieces. Grace's words echoed in my ears, soft but unyielding. "If you use it, you'll lose yourself, and I'll lose you too." The judge had warned that surprises would not be welcomed. The draft will had already poisoned the waters. And still, I sat there, trembling, knowing that if I didn't strike, I might lose everything. It was my soul against my survival. And I had to choose. The morning began with the judge reviewing the evidence aloud, his voice calm but heavy. "We have before us 2 documents, the earlier draft, which divides the estate, and the later, notarized will, which leaves everything to Mrs. Thompson. We also have extensive testimony regarding financial support to Miss Vega and her children. The question before this court is not whether Daniel Thompson was faithful in life, but what weight to give his written word in death. His words were daggers, not whether he was faithful. As if fidelity were a footnote, not the whole wound of my life." Marisol's lawyer rose first. His voice was honeyed, practiced. "Your Honor, the law respects a will, yes. But it also respects intent. Mr. Thompson provided for my client and their children consistently, lovingly. He promised them care. To deny them now would be to erase decades of devotion. We asked the court for fairness, not erasure." Marisol dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Her children sat beside her, their faces solemn, righteous. Then Halpern rose. His voice was sharper, like steel. Your Honor, with respect, fairness cannot undo law. Mr. Thompson left a valid, final will. Whatever drafts existed before, whatever promises he may have whispered, the law is clear. His estate belongs to his lawful wife, Ruth Thompson. Anything else is speculation, fueled by grief and resentment. The judge listened, impassive. And me? I sat there, my heart in my throat, my fingers brushing against the folder in my bag. During recess, Grace and Clara cornered me in the hallway. Grace gripped my hands, her eyes red with tears. Ruthie, please. Don't use it, let the law stand. Trust that truth will carry you, even if you lose. Clara was fire beside her. Don't listen, use the folder. Crush Marisol, show the court she's no saint. Do you want to lose your house, your name, your life? Use it. Their voices clashed like thunder and rain, pounding in my head. I whispered, I can't decide. I can't. Grace kissed my forehead, whispering through her tears. Then choose your soul, Ruthie. Choose the part of you that's still whole. Clara snarled. Or choose survival. Because the court won't save you, only you can save you. And I broke again, caught between their truths. Back inside, the judge announced his intent to render a decision soon. But first, he allowed closing statements. Halpern rose, his calm voice wrapping around me like a shield. This case is about law, not sentiment. And the law is clear, the will stands. Anything else is noise. Then Marisol's lawyer stood, his words sharp as glass. This case is about justice, about children who loved their father who were loved in return. To deny them is to deny truth itself. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. The judge banged his gavel for silence. And in that silence, my heart screamed. I could end it. I could open the folder, hand Halpern the photographs, the bank statements, the proof of Marisol's own sins. I could turn the tide, crush her story, reclaim my dignity, but I could also lose Grace. Lose myself. My hand hovered over the bag, trembling, shaking, and I heard both voices, Grace's plea and Clara's fury, colliding inside me. That night, at home, I sat by the fire, the folder in my lap. Grace and Clara were silent for once, each, sitting on opposite sides of the room, waiting, watching. I whispered into the flames, Daniel, is this what you wanted, for me to be torn in two? For me to choose between light and darkness? The fire crackled, offering no answer. And I realized, tomorrow, the choice would no longer wait. Tomorrow, the verdict would come, and tomorrow, I would have to decide who I truly was. The morning of the verdict, the sky was gray. Heavy clouds hung low, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. I dressed slowly, every movement weighted, every button fastened with trembling fingers. Grace tied the silver cross around my neck. Her hands were gentle, her eyes filled with tears. No matter what happens today, Ruthie, you are still you. Remember that. Clara stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her jaw clenched. And remember this, win or lose, you fought. Don't forget that either. I stood between them, as I had so many times before, one hand holding Grace's softness, the other bracing against Clara's fire. And I whispered a prayer. God, let me walk into this room with dignity. Let me walk out whole. The courthouse was packed, every bench filled, every whisper buzzing. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I took my seat at the plaintiff's table, Halpern beside me, his face calm but pale. Across the aisle, Marisol sat tall, her children flanking her like soldiers. Her lawyer shuffled his papers with quiet confidence. The judge entered, gavel in hand, his face solemn. The room fell silent. "This court," he began, "has considered the evidence presented, the testimony given, and the documents entered into record. The matter before us is not one of emotion, though emotions have run high. It is a matter of law." My heart pounded. The court recognizes that Daniel Thompson, in his life, provided for both his lawful wife and for Miss Vega and her children. The testimony has made clear his divided loyalties. The earlier draft of his will confirms this struggle. However, I held my breath. The law requires us to uphold the final, valid, notarized will. And that will leaves the estate in its entirety to Ruth Thompson. The gavel struck. Gasps filled the courtroom. Grace burst into tears, clutching my hand. Clara let out a fierce, triumphant laugh. And me? I sat frozen, numb. I had won. But it didn't feel like victory. Marisol's lawyer rose instantly, filing motions, his voice sharp. But the judge cut him off. "The ruling stands. This court is adjourned." The gavel fell again, final as thunder. Marisol turned to me then, her eyes blazing with fury, her son's jaw clenched, his fists tight. Her daughter's eyes, Daniel's eyes, burned into me with hatred. I wanted to speak, to say, "I didn't do this to you." He did. But the words stuck in my throat. They swept out of the courtroom, their faces like carved stone. And I knew this wasn't over. Maybe the legal battle was done, but the wound would linger. For them, for me. Outside, reporters swarmed, neighbors whispered, strangers stared. Grace shielded me with her arms, whispering, "Keep your head high, Ruthie." Clara, meanwhile, spat at the onlookers, snarling, "Go on, feast on her life, you vultures." We made it home, where I finally collapsed into a chair, trembling. Grace knelt beside me, holding my hand. "It's over, sweetheart. You can rest now." Clara poured herself a drink, her voice sharp. "Over? Hardly. They'll come back with appeals, with whispers, with claws. But you stood tall. You didn't break." I closed my eyes, tears sliding down my cheeks. "I won, Clara. But it doesn't feel like winning. I lost Daniel long before the court. I lost the life I thought I had. And nothing the gavel says will give that back." Silence fell. Even Clara had no answer. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the fire. The house was quiet, heavy. Daniel's ghost lingered in every corner. I thought about Marisol, about her children, about the look in Isabel's eyes, the hatred that mirrored the love I had once seen in Daniel's. And I thought about Grace's plea, Clara's fury, the two paths I had walked between. And then, slowly, I began to speak aloud, as if telling my story one last time. "My name is Ruth. I was married for 30 years to a man I thought I knew. I gave him my heart, my faith, my life. And he gave me lies. Lies dressed as love, promises dressed as fidelity. I stood in court while strangers judged me, while another woman claimed my place, while children with his eyes called me blind, called me unworthy. I saw the town turn, whispering that I was a fool. And I broke into pieces. But I learned something in that breaking. I learned that love can be real, even when it's laced with betrayal. I learned that trust is not foolishness, it is courage. And I learned that when everything is stripped away, the only thing left is the truth you choose to carry. I could have chosen vengeance. I could have burned Marisol with her own sins. I had the chance. But I didn't. Because in the end, winning wasn't about houses or money. It wasn't about crushing her. It was about keeping myself whole. And that perhaps is the cruelest mercy of all. That I walk away with the estate, yes, but also with the knowledge that Daniel's lies cannot define me. Because I am Ruth. I am still standing. And if you hear nothing else from my story, hear this. Betrayal does not make you less. Betrayal does not erase your worth. The ones who deceive are the ones who lose themselves. So live. Even after the lies, even after the whispers. Live with dignity, live with grace, live with fire if you must. But live as yourself, whole. The fire crackled. The house was silent. Grace's words lingered in my heart, Clara's fury in my bones. And for the first time since Daniel's death, I felt something new rising inside me. Not grief, not rage, but peace. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.